Hi everyone and welcome to In Deep Geek Live. Today we are back in the world of Ice and Fire. We've been going through for the last few weeks through the history of Westeros. We started right back in the Dawn Age. We've moved ourselves all the way up now to the years of the Targaryen rulership over the Seven Kingdoms. And now we've reached the big Targaryen Civil War, the Dance of the Dragons. This is a crucial moment in the history of the Targaryens. And I'll get to that in just one moment. Because, in fact, I'll say it now because I think this is an important context-setting thing. Up to this point, through the reign of the Targaryens, although it wasn't always easy, they had been gaining in power. They started off with just the three of them, 3 Targaryens and 3 dragons. And then over the course of the next century, 120, 130 years, the number of Targaryens increased, the number of dragons increased. So by the start of the Dance of the Dragons, we've got around 20 live dragons. We've got countless Targaryens and people with Targaryen ancestry. This is only going in one direction. This is, if it carries on like this is going to get past a tipping point, and the Targaryen rule will be able to just get stronger and stronger, and their grip on power is going to get tighter and tighter. By the end of the Dance of the Dragons, Targaryen rule is suddenly on a knife edge once more. The dragons, they're not all gone. There are still a few around, but the number of dragons has come down from 20 to 4, or realistically just 1 dragon that could be used for dragon riding. That is crucial, because from that moment on, this is not Targaryens threatening to be in charge of absolutely everything because there are dragons all over Westeros. This is, from this moment onwards, Targaryens struggling to maintain power with lots of challenges coming in from all over the place. So that's what we're looking at today. This is the tipping point, roughly halfway through the Targaryen rule, the tipping point of their power. What I normally try to do at the beginning of these live streams is just to give a little bit of a flavor of some of the things that have been going on out in the sort of the wider nerdy world of things that you might be interested in happening. There's not been a huge amount this week, I'll be honest. If you're interested in June, if you're not interested in June, then you should be. June has been out in a lot of countries for a while already. I believe it is now opened in the USA. It's opened here, I think, as well, just this weekend. I'm planning on going to see it in a couple of days' time. It's looking amazing. It's had some fantastic reviews, so I'm very much looking forward to that. If you're into Wheel of Time, you will probably be interested in knowing that they are producing lots of promo materials. If you want extra behind-the-scenes snippets, if you want mini interviews with the actors, if you want behind-the-scenes interviews and articles, it's coming thick and fast. Pretty much every day now we're getting new Wheel of Time stuff. I think this is, as well as being really great for fans of Wheel of the Wheel of Time, it's also, I think, a kind of a setting the way for what Amazon are going to be doing with the Lord of the Rings TV show in just under a year's time. Expect this to be massive. They will be absolutely swamping us with bits of information, with trailers, with pictures, and this is going to ramp up over the course of the next year. So that's what's been going on. Otherwise, as I say, it's been relatively quiet. Witcher season 3 has been commissioned, and that was a couple of weeks ago, but I don't think I mentioned it. And that will be coming out. Witcher season 2 will be coming out in December. But that's about it. Incidentally, as we're talking about House of the Dragon today, House of the Dragon filming is still continuing. They've moved to Spain, which is where they did a lot of the filming for when they were doing a lot of the stuff in and around King's Landing in Game of Thrones. So they're probably doing a lot of that. They're there for a couple of weeks. I think they're going to be moving over to America for another couple of weeks after that. But the feeling is we're coming towards the end of filming. which has been progressing, given that we're in a time of COVID, reasonably well. They've had to have a couple of little breaks, but no major setbacks from the point at which they started filming. So, although we don't have a release date beyond 2022, I think we can probably reasonably assume that it will come out when they were hoping it would come out in 2022, which I don't think they will put it up directly against Lord of the Rings. So my best guess is the first half of next year, maybe summer, April, if you're very, very lucky. So that's the kind of timescale we're looking at. Googly Woogly, oh hi there, Googly Woogly, saying, oh, very generous super chat, thank you very much, saying beverages are poured and I'm ready to settle in for a relaxing afternoon. Thanks for hosting this chat every week. Cheers. Well, cheers to you. And thank you very much. Okay, so what I will do, I think, just to start off with, is I'll use a question from, as always, I frame these around questions from my patrons. I'll frame this introduction from a question from Mara Lee. Hi there, Mara, saying, Robert, what was the prelude that led up to the Dance of the Dragons? And how long did the war actually last? Well, the war lasted for, depending on when you draw the initial timeline of when it started and exactly when it ended, because both ends of it are a little bit muddy, but less than 2 years. This is about a year and a bit is sort of the overall timescale. Now, the build up to this, which I should probably say I'm expecting House of the Dragon to be covering, season 1 is going to be mostly the build up to the Dance of the Dragons. I think that although we don't know, they've not told us exactly what timescale season 1's going to be covering, it certainly seems to be going back in time a bit. We've had some various castings for young versions of characters, and we've not seen anything in the teaser trailer that we got that looks like it's beyond the opening salvos of the war. And given that this is presumably hoping to be extending out to maybe 5 seasons, then yeah, I think this build up is what we're going to be seeing predominantly in season 1. And the build up starts with Jaehaerys the First, the great king, the old king, ruled for a very long time over Westeros, and he wasn't perfect, but he was very important to establishing Targaryen reign and rule, and he was a pretty good king, along with his queen Alicent. And what he did was he did the boring bits of how to establish a kingdom, but the necessary things. He did codification of laws. He started setting up infrastructure, the King's Road, things like that. He was the person who really set in train how do we build a continent-wide nation. So that was his role. But he had a problem, is that all of his heirs kept on dying. So he called the Great Council, and the Great Council were there to decide on who was going to follow on from him, who was going to be the heir. And they decided, rather than going to Rhaenys, who was the elder, they would in fact go to a younger heir who was male, Viserys. Now, this caused some consternation at the time, but this was what the Lords of the Realm wanted. Rhaenys kind of bit her tongue, became the queen who never was, married well, and just sucked it up a bit, but never really got over it, is the kind of feeling we had. But anyway, Viserys took over. Viserys often gets a bit of a bad rap. I'll be fascinated to see how they portray him on the show. They got Paddy Considine being the actor playing him, who is, if you've ever seen him, you might have seen him in things like Peaky Blinders. He's an excellent actor, and he tends to carry with him a vulnerability behind quite a hard exterior, which I'll be fascinated to see how they take into Viserys. He was generally a well-loved monarch. He continued with a time of broad peace, prosperity. The seven kingdoms were doing well. They just carried on growing. The Targaryens strengthened their grip on power. They'd now been there for a few generations, so it was now becoming a part of a proper dynasty. That was what his role was. And the problem came with his who was going to take over from him. While he was there wasn't going to be a civil war. This was not a problem. It was all okay. He may not have been a particularly effective king. He may not have been a particularly decisive king, but he does seem to have been quite a well-loved king. And he had one daughter from his first wife, this daughter Rhaenyra, the Realm's Delight, she was known as, and he said she is going to be my heir. Fine. His first wife died, and then he remarried. He remarried Alicent Hightower, and then he had some children with her. Crucially, he had sons with her. Now, taken the judgment that happened at the end of Jaehaerys's reign, that men should take precedence over women in matters of succession, this allowed an element of doubt to come into who really should be the heir here. Viserys never wavered. He said, "This is Rhaenyra, is my heir. This is my daughter, my eldest child. She's going to take over after me." So he was very clear on who his heir was, and nobody ever disputed that. But there came a problem in that she had married Laenor Velaryon. This was a political marriage, as far as we can tell, and her children with him, they didn't look like him. And there were rumors, probably very well-founded rumors, that they weren't actually his child. Apparently, maybe they were Larys Strong, her member of the Kingsguard, her champion and favorite. They looked quite a lot like him. So there was a feeling of, well, hang on a moment. Even if she is the right heir, her heirs, probably not. So an element of doubt was sown, and the Hightowers were very ambitious and soon built up two factions in court. Rhaenyra's faction, who became known as the Blacks, and they supported the claim, the very reasonable claim, that the king gets to decide who follows on, and the king said Rhaenyra is going to follow on, so that's her claim. And then there's the Alicent Hightower, and she's putting forward the case for her sons. They became known as the Greens, and there was a lot of mounting tension between the two parties. While Viserys was alive, this wasn't a problem. It's like occasionally came to blows, but he would just like call them together and say, "No, just everyone just calm down," and they would play nicely while he was there. And eventually they kind of split up, and so the Blacks, Rhaenyra, went off to Dragonstone with her new husband, Damon Targaryen. I'm sure we'll talk about him again in a bit. They based themselves on Dragonstone. The Blacks are over there. The Greens are in King's Landing. Alicent, married to the king with her children there. They were encamped in King's Landing. And then the king died. And this is the crucial point. This is the start of the dance, is that the Hightowers effectively launched a coup. They claimed they had good reason for it. They claimed that precedent said that the eldest male heir should inherit. They claimed that there were serious doubts about the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's children, but this was going against the old king's express wishes. They decided to go for it. They, in secret, this took them about a week. They didn't tell anyone that the king had died. They kept everything locked down, and then they crowned their candidate, Aegon II. And then the Blacks found out were horrified. There was an exchange of threats and letters. Everybody was sending out ravens, trying to rally support from all the different parts of the Seven Kingdoms. Then eventually something had to give. And the start of hostilities as a whole came with the deaths of children on both sides. One of them was in the first dance, the first battle between two dragons. And then the second was an act of retaliation. And that, from that moment, both sides had a blood grievance against the other, and there was no turning back, and it escalated and it escalated and it escalated. So that's the build up to the Dance of the Dragons. As I say, that is probably the plot of season 1. I don't know exactly how far it's going to go in season 1, but this kind of makes sense. It's that there are a number of places where they could end it dramatically on a cliffhanger. They could end it with the Greens deciding that they're going to go to war, or they're going to crown Aegon. Could end with those first bit of hostilities once the battle lines are drawn. There are a number of points around there where they could, but I don't think they will get on in season 1 into the main battles as a whole. So that's the background. That's where we're at, and it's a crucial point in the history of the Targaryens and the history of the Seven Kingdoms, because at the beginning there are lots of Targaryens and lots of dragons. At the end, there aren't. And if you want my pithy takeaway of this, is people often think, who won? Did the Greens win? Did the Blacks win? Well, I mean, we can probably technically argue that at the very end of it, the Blacks probably did win. But the real takeaway is that the Targaryens as a whole lost. They had a huge, complete grip over the Seven Kingdoms. By the end of it, the entire Seven Kingdoms were on their knees because of all of the bloodshed. Chelsea Oliver, thank you very much for the super chat, saying, "Hi Robert, how do you envisage things could be different if Rhaenys pressed her claim?" Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. That she could have. She simply did not have the support. Is the answer. The problem was that because they went to a great council, and this is the whole idea of a great council, is you try to gain some kind of idea about where the support is, and the support fell overwhelmingly behind Viserys. And the moment that happened, she looked around, and yes, she had the Velaryons on her side and a couple of other important houses, but the vast majority of people were against her. So she could have pushed her claim, but she would have lost because everybody would have been against her. So she had to suck it up. She had to just accept it. And my general take is that this wasn't good for her. This wasn't fair to her. But she and those around her actually did their level best to try and bring this back around. They tried to marry back into the other bit of the family, trying to bring the inheritance together. That did not work. So I think that she could have done. She would have lost at the time, and I think she realized it. And I think that the much better chance for her came with Rhaenyra later. Question from Kelly Johnson. Was the shepherd a Maester agent? Oh, this is moving quite a lot later on in the story. Towards the end, I'll quickly answer it here, but I'm sure we'll get onto this later. Towards the end of the dance, then there was a people's uprising in King's Landing, which led to the storming of the Dragon Pit and the killing of the dragons that were there. This was the last great time. Dragons had been dying through the dance, killing each other, some of them taken down by just arrow fire from the ground. But there were, I think it was 5 dragons who were all killed in the dragon pit by sheer weight of numbers. They couldn't escape, they couldn't fly away. The dragon pit, we saw it on Game of Thrones, it was sort of open to the elements, but at the time it had this huge domed roof, and the dragons, they were chained, they could not fly up and out. They were just overwhelmed and swarmed by thousands, tens of thousands of small folk who have just seen or have been whipped up into a frenzy by this character called the Shepherd. Now, was he a Maester agent? I mean, he could have been. I will talk about the Maesters in just one moment. The most likely thing is no. The most likely thing he was what he appeared to be, which was a fanatic for the Faith of the Seven. The Faith of the Seven had been not quite at loggerheads with the Targaryens, but there had been tensions, there had been uprisings, there had been outright war between them. This is entirely in keeping with the rest of the narrative that he was just a fanatic for the faith. Andrew Kay saying Jaehaerys I could have set the precedent, and arguably the dance would be much less likely to happen. Yeah, he could have done. He could have just picked, but he went with the Great Council. Marvin Martin saying Damon used Rhaenyra and didn't care about the Velaryons, so why really waste blood and cheese on a kid and not dragon riding princes or king? Okay, so this is I talked about the opening salvos, the reprisal for the death of Lucerys or Lucerys. We'll see how they decide to pronounce it on the show. Was Damon said, "I'll get you revenge. I will get you, Rhaenyra, revenge for this, the death of your son," and he arranged for the brutal murder of one of Aegon's children, and this was done by people we only know by the names of Blood and Cheese. Now, why weren't they used to be killing off somebody more important in the war? Well, I think it's just as simple as Daemon Targaryen doesn't appear to have been a master strategist. He appears to have been quite hot-tempered. He appears to have been very passionate and driven by how he's feeling, and his feeling then was revenge. It's important, I think, we can look back at this and see it through the filter of the Dance of the Dragons and think, well, what's happening here? They're at war with someone. This was not war at that point. Then armies had not marched by this point. This was tit for tat stuff. And so what it was just vengeance. They killed your son. I'm going to kill one of theirs. That was all it was. It was just evening things up. Yes, if he sat down and thought about it, if they'd wished to do something more dramatic, than they could have tried to kill off one of the prime movers in this. They could have killed off Aegon himself. They could have killed off Otto Hightower, for example. They could have gone for a lot of different things, but this was just about revenge. Mermaid in the Water. Hi, Robert. Do you think King Viserys had Sir Harwin Strong murdered, as is speculated in Fire and Blood? Let's start by just being clear about who wrote Fire and Blood and why. This is the Maesters, so this is not an unbiased account. This is Archmaester Gildane, who is picking up on histories from other people who have written there. There's his predecessor Ulwyle. There's Septon. I've forgotten the name of Septon Eustace. There's Mushroom, of course. Hopefully, we'll get to talk about him as well in a moment. So there's all these other different accounts of what happened, and he's trying to pull them together and he is presenting them in a way which pushes the Maester agenda. So we shouldn't take this as definite truth. Just because Archmaester Gildane implies something, it doesn't mean it happened. Harwin Strong um, is a character that I think she was the champion of and the favorite of Rhaenyra, and almost certainly her lover. Could Viserys have ordered his death? Possibly. He doesn't seem to be that character, is my general take. He seems to be a conflict avoider rather than somebody who tries to be strategically striking down opponents. That doesn't seem to be his style. The person who does seem to be it does seem to be his style is Damon Targaryen, and I've often said here, if in doubt, blame Bloodraven. I think as we're getting into House of the Dragon, we need to start coming up with it. If in doubt, blame Damon. He is. He almost certainly is behind. We know that he's behind at least one assassination, the blood and cheese thing. That was something that he arranged, and his it's, I think, something we will come back to a lot. It's the speculation to which the extent to which his own personal ambition drove a huge amount of what was going on here. He was, before Rhaenyra appeared on the scene, he was the heir. It's something we often gloss over, but he was, being younger brother of Viserys, he was next in line. He was the heir until Rhaenyra appeared, and then mysteriously, and I'm not saying it, these are definitely down to him, but the person that he married and the person that Rhaenyra married both died, and if he wished to then marry Rhaenyra, which seems to have been his plan for quite a while, he also, her lover will also need to have gone. So if I had to point the finger at anyone for the death of Harwin Strong, and I have to say it is anyone, but if I had to point the finger at anyone, then I think Damon is a much more likely candidate. Tutsprechen Leben Lenga saying, "Hi Robert, did Sarah or her descendants have any role in the dance or its aftermath? She laughed off an invitation in 101, but might still have lived." No, so this is one of Jaehaerys's children who ends up in Essos. Now, she is invited to be one of the potential candidates at the Great Council and doesn't want to. Does she have any descendants? Probably, very probably, and they will almost certainly have carried on down through the century or so, and there will be descendants even at the time of Song of Ice and Fire. We mustn't think that, yes, we're told about Daenerys and Jon and Fagon, but we mustn't think that they're the only people with any drop of Targaryen or Valyrian blood. There are lots of people with Valyrian ancestry out there. Might she have been involved? I don't personally think so. There's no idea that she was thinking of being a monarch. She seems actually to have been quite happy where she was. I think I had a couple more questions. Find them. Yeah, Cloaked Juan. Hi there. This is picking up, and thank you. You do this every time. I appreciate it every time, picking up questions for other people in the chat. This is for Stephen Campbell. And aside from Alicent being married to the king, do you think the Hightowers had been building up for an eventual claim, or did they just go with the flow like they usually do? I think more the latter. I've not seen... If you go back through the Hightower history, and the Hightowers are a very old house, a very, very old house. Now, it's worth... noting that they tended just to be happy to stick to where they were all through the history, not just the history of the Targaryen rule, but earlier. They were happy ruling Old Town. They were happy that their influence was being felt through the fact that the two big pan Westeros organizations, the Maesters and the Faith, were based in Old Town and sponsored effectively by House Hightower. They were happy that that was their base of influence. So there was no really all the way through. House Gardner came in, set up a kingdom. The Hightowers could have tried challenging. There's not. They don't seem to have like really thought about doing this. House Tyrell got made the Lords Paramount down in the Reach. The Hightowers didn't really grumble about that because they were very secure in who they were. So historically, there's no real reason to suggest the Hightowers have been there. There has been one difference that has happened, which is with the rise of King's Landing, the shift of political power in Westeros has moved from Old Town, which was the oldest, biggest, and most important place in all of Westeros for millennia. It shifted across to King's Landing. So there was some loss of power there. Was this a long-term plot? I don't think so. I think this was definitely Otto Hightower being ambitious, seeing where the power was, and thinking maybe this is how we keep our influence by marrying into the new royal family. Catherine Furseth saying, and thank you, Catherine, I got your question over on Patreon as well, saying, doesn't the role of the Hightowers in plotting and so instigating the Dance of the Dragons go against our general view of them as being cautious, staying in the background and not taking chances with their position? Yes, exactly as I was saying. So, I mean, I think other than what I said in answer to the previous question, I think the only thing I would add here is this does seem to be about personality. This seems to be about we get to know about the two Hightowers, Otto and Alicent. They don't seem to have been dropping other Hightowers in and around other hugely important positions in King's Land. This is not like when the Lannisters married in at the beginning of the story that we know married into Robert Baratheon, and before you know it, you look around and you've got Jaime's in the Kingsguard, and you've got Tyrion was there being hand with the king, and they've got Grand Maester, who's clearly a sympathizer. They've got half of the Kingsguard who are Lannister. This isn't what was going on there. This seems to have just been a couple of people. It's also worth pointing out there appears to be a personality clash between Daemon Targaryen and Otto Hightower. A really big personality clash between the two of them. And it's, I mean, part of this is probably a power play. Daemon, we see that he is clearly there with Rhaenyra now bolstering her claim to the throne, and Alicent comes along, and that is challenging that claim. So there's a clash going on there, but the two people simply do not get on. So my take, based on what we have, is that this was the Hightowers, a couple of Hightowers, going off on an opportunistic punt, see whether they could get power. The rest of the Hightowers actually, after their deaths, they actually gave up very easily. They didn't carry on the fight. That wasn't a point of principle. It was like, we tried that. Now we'll accept terms of peace afterwards. So this doesn't appear to be a huge positional change from House Hightower. Chaos Ballerina. What was the travel time between DS and King's Landing? So Dragonstone and King's Landing on dragons. How fast could news travel during the dance? So from Dragonstone and King's Landing, it's quite quick. We're never given exact timings, but it's not a few minutes, but it's less than a day's travel easily. Probably only an hour or two on the back of a dragon. They're relatively close. News could travel very quickly during the dance. It didn't travel really by dragons, because the dragons were right on one side or the other. It wasn't that dragons could ferry news or anything. And the first one thing that the Greens did very well was have a complete lockdown on information. They imprisoned anyone that they thought might get information out, and this did seem to catch the Blacks by surprise. They didn't know. Days went by. The king was dead. The king's body was decomposing in the bedchamber where he died, and it was starting to smell out the Red Keep apparently, and the information did not get out. So that was a very good bit of message management or information management by the Greens to start with. But you could definitely, certainly in the early days, then they Grandmaster or Weil, for example, headed off to Dragonstone and back to sort of try and broker a peace, and that didn't take long. This was quite a short. It wasn't instantaneous, but it was quite a quick thing to do. Matthew Morano, are Sheep Stealer and Cannibal still alive? What most likely happened to them after the dance? Well, I've got a question about this from one of my patrons coming up, but I will answer that in terms of if they're still alive at the time of A Song of Ice and Fire. No, I think that's pretty clear, for the simple reason that dragons are quite hard to hide, and there has been no evidence of them at all for more than 100 years. And maybe they just like got very old and lay down and were having a snooze, but dragons have to come out to eat. Food doesn't come to dragons. They have to go and get food, and there's been no sign of either of them for, as I say, a century or more. So this is all the clue I think that we need. Could they possibly still be alive? Possibly, but as I say, they would need to eat. So I don't think it's likely. As to what happened to them, as I said, I'll go into this in more detail later. Cannibal was on Dragonstone. Cannibal was in a cave on sort of the far side of the island. People did not go near that cave, but they could see Cannibal coming out every now and then. As for Sheep Stealer ended up in the Mountains of the Moon in the Vale of Arryn, there with Nettles, and was around for a little while, but then presumably ended up growing old and dying. We don't hear the rest of that story. Kelly Johnson saying, is Mushroom lying about his Rhaenyra exploits? Mushroom, for those who don't know, Mushroom is a fantastic character. Again, we'll come on to him, but he is so he's a dwarf. There are echoes of Tyrion going on. He is the court jester, effectively, for Rhaenyra, and he is also a chronicler of what happened during this period. And his history seems to be easily the most salacious of them. Now, the Maesters are very prudish. The Maesters are seeing the worst in women. They're clearly got a political agenda in lots of things. Mushroom he gives the best possible story you could imagine in any circumstance, and seems a hugely fun character. I really, really hope that we get to meet him in House of the Dragon. Was he lying? I'm sure he lied about some things. He was exaggerating about some things, but he probably was also right about some things. We deliberately, George R. R. Martin leaves it vague, and so some of it is probably true, or at least there's enough of a grain of truth in it. Just see if I've got any more questions. Okay, one more question from Kelly Johnson saying, Show Alicent doesn't have Valyrian looks. Alicent Hightower is not Valyrian. She's a Hightower. So no, she will not have Valyrian looks. Totesprechen Leben Langer saying the events of A Song of Ice and Fire are often suggested to be inspired by the War of the Roses. Is there a similar possible real-world foil for the dance? Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a particular thing. There is clearly a Wars of the Roses, or the War of the Roses is inspiration not just for A Song of Ice and Fire, but also for this. I think there is very clear battle after battle and people going away and then coming back, and eventually the two sides having to sort of come together by marriage to end it all. That does echo the War of the Roses very clearly. That's very much in the Dance of the Dragons. But yeah, I'd be interested if there's anyone. I don't think George R. R. Martin has said specifically the Dance of the Dragons is based on such and such. He tries not to cut and paste from history. But I'd be very interested in the chat if anyone's got any specific ideas about bits of history that this might be a reflection of, because he does definitely like to reflect real world history. Cloaked Juan, picking up question for James Barnum. Do you think Damon ended up on the Isle of Faces with the Green Men, as his body was never found, but his dragon Caraxes made it to the shore before dying? Again, I've got a question about this later, but so this is one of the best moments. It has to be said cinematically, and when I say cinematically, in my head, cinematically, because we haven't seen it yet. But we get the two biggest war leaders of each side, Aemond Targaryen and Damon Targaryen, fighting each other on Dragonback above the God's Eye Lake. And what seems to have happened is that Damon leaps out of his saddle with his sword, jumps down mid-flight, stabs Aemond in the eye, and the dragons and the Targaryens come crashing down and into the lake, and that's it. The dragons die. As you say, Caraxes does manage to make it to the water's edge. Aemond is found still strapped to his dragon with sword, Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister, in his eye. Which is how that is recovered. Damon Targaryen's body is never recovered. I don't think there's a big mystery here. I don't think that I mean, George R. R. Martin has left it deliberately open, so maybe something happened, but I don't think there's a mystery. They were flying high up in the sky, and he fell a great distance. He wasn't attached to his dragon, so his body will almost certainly have died on impact with the water. Targaryens are not immune to falling from great heights, so he almost certainly died. And what happened to his body? Got washed away somewhere. That's the most logical thing. It's boring. It's not as exciting. Could he have ended up on the Isle of Faces? Yeah, he could have done. Could have done, but we don't read about it. We don't hear about it. It doesn't seem to have any impact on the plot. So I don't think we can say that it's likely. Question from Chelsea Oliver. Is it possibly for Dany's dragons being from the eggs of any of the dragons in the Dance of the Dragon? I don't think so. I did a video on this ages ago. So, and this ties in with the idea that the Maesters, after the dance, the Maesters saw the opportunity to get rid of the dragons, because after that, suddenly the dragons, dragon eggs, when they hatched, the dragons were all stunted, as if the eggs themselves had been poisoned. So I think all the eggs on Westeros had been poisoned by the Maesters. That seems to be what happened. Dany got 3 eggs. over in Essos. And we have to ask, okay, these hatched, so they weren't poisoned, so they probably didn't come from um, Westeros. Eggs that are in Essos, eggs that could possibly be bought. The most likely is that these were the three that Alyssa Farman stole well before the Dance of the Dragons and sold to the Sea Lord of Bravos. That is, I think, the most likely. There's more evidence for that as well, so this is not just me sort of making it up. But in terms of where might 3 dragon eggs come from, we know where 3 dragon eggs were. We know that they were being kept by the Sea Lord just in case they might hatch when it appeared likely, because dragons hadn't hatched for so long, a century and a half. Yeah, he could get rid of them then and sell them on to somebody who was hugely rich. So that's the most likely place for those to have come from. Swooshy, which character are you most excited to see on screen? There are lots. I mean, Mushroom. I really want to see Mushroom. I think of the main characters, Damon Targaryen is going to be the most exciting. He is the character you can tell George R. R. Martin loved writing. The rogue prince, he called him. He uses all this wonderful language to describe him, how charismatic he is, how horrible and terrible, but also brilliant he is. So he should be the charismatic heartbeat of this show. As for other characters, Larys, the Clubfoot Strong, as a Master of Whisperers, is really enigmatic. Think of Varys, but more enigmatic. Then that's who you've got going on there. So I'd love to see him. And yeah, I don't know. I think I'll stick with those ones. That's enough for the time being. Mushroom, Damon, and Larys. I think Lady Misery, Miseria is also. I'll be fascinated to see what they do. And Alice Rivers, when they get towards the end, she's very enigmatic character. Mara O saying, I had a major surgery last week, and Wilston Hospital, your videos were the only things to comfort me. I know you know the joy you bring to people through this channel. Your hard work is appreciated. Oh, thank you. That really it means a lot to me. As I say, it's when you do this, I'm just me sitting in front of my laptop, talking to my laptop, and to know that what I do has an impact in people's lives really means a lot to me. And if you had major surgery, sounds like you came through it okay. I hope you did, certainly, and all my very best wishes for you for ongoing recovery. I know surgery, that's just the start. You've got always, whatever it was, there will be a long recovery period. So all my very best wishes for you. But thank you so much for telling me. Cloaked Juan, Carl Karsnark would like you to say, Cloaked Juan loves Kraken tacos. Well, there you go. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Cloaked Juan. Clay Johnson, there is some great Empire of the Dawn link to Valyrian and Hightower. I mean, I think this depends on how you interpret these things. We're sort of slightly moving beyond the scope of the Dance of the Dragons. House Hightower are very old. But they are based. Old Town is based on the initial trading port where people from Essos came and traded across into Westeros. Was that people from the Great Empire of the Dawn? Quite possibly. So, yes, there's a possible link, but it's never made explicit. Okay, let's go to some questions from my patrons. Diego Godoy saying, Hola, Robert. Hola. Don't you think it's ironic that King Viserys I wanted to simply decree for his daughter Rhaenyra to be queen after him, given that he himself had been crowned king after passing over Rhaenys's claim and that of her son Laenor. Thanks. Yes, ironic is probably not even a strong enough word, to be honest. This is something George R. R. Martin, and when you read Fire and Blood, it's very, very, very clear. George R. R. Martin is showing us how female Targaryens have been written out of the Targaryen history. And they've been denied power again and again and again. So you have pretty much at every generation of the Targaryens, when you look at when you're reading through Fire and Blood, we get it, Aegon. Aegon is the king. It was Aegon's invasion. When you actually read what happened after the invasion, and the invasion very clearly was the three of them doing it, you find that actually most of the time he wasn't sitting on the Iron Throne. It was one of the two sisters who was sitting on the Iron Throne. They effectively ruled jointly. He may have been the titular king, but they were more than just his queens. They did rule with him, but they didn't get a name check in the list of rulers. Then we can go down and look at Arya Targaryen as an example. She was under two different kings. She was passed over effectively. She was next in line, but didn't get it. We've already talked about Rhaenys, the queen, or the queen who never was. She probably should have inherited, according to whatever they thought was passed over. Then we Rhaenys. Then we get Rhaenyra, who actually did rule the Seven Kingdoms in the sense that she sat in King's Landing on the Iron Throne for 6 months. But when we get the list of monarchs of the Seven Kingdoms, she never gets a mention. She's not on there because her side even technically ended up winning, but she's not counted as being one of the rulers. And this is something that George R. R. Martin comes back to again and again and again and again, that there are women who were ruling, women who should have been ruling, but they never get recognized. They never actually become the official ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. So when we get to our current story and we get Dany wanting to come in and take over, this is actually a first for the Targaryens because they never actually managed to get a female Targaryen monarch. They always moved around it. Even after all of this, then this was used, the Dance of the Dragons was used as an excuse to pass over even more female Targaryens who probably were in line to the throne, because they said, look what happened when Rhaenyra was ruling. We don't want that to happen. She was a woman. These people are women. We're not going to allow it to happen again. So this is always all the way through this. And even when George R. R. Martin writes Fire and Blood Part 2, which he said is not going to be until he's finished A Dream of Spring. So treat that with as large a pinch of salt as you wish. But in that second half of the history of the Targaryens, then that also will be full of women who were next in line and were passed over perhaps unfairly. So yes, ironic, definitely. But I think George R. R. Martin is making an even bigger point going through this. Question from Sebastian Jumala saying, hi, Robert, could you tell us a bit more about what happened at the so-called Hour of the Wolf? Why did Cregan Stark resign from being Hand of the King? Why did he decline to rule as the regent to Aegon III? He had absolute power at that moment. Also, was it the first time that the Starks got involved in southern politics? If so, why? Thanks, as always. You are a gentleman and a scholar. I've always wanted to say it. Well, you also are a gentleman and a scholar. It's a fine phrase. This takes us back to the end of the dance, really. So in fact, if you fast forward from the build-up that I've said, you basically get a year or so of carnage. Dragons fighting dragons, armies fighting armies, people dying all over the place. It's horrific. It's terrible. The entire Seven Kingdoms is on its knees. The technically Aegon the Second at this point is the king, and he, being Alicent Hightower's son, looks like the Greens have finally won the day. But he is technically ruler, but there are armies coming. The Blacks have, earlier on in the war, they gained allies across the peace, and there are armies. An army from the Vale, there's an army from the Riverlands, and there's an army crucially from the north who are coming down to King's Landing. And the Aegon II is basically, he's been hurt bad by this, and he digs his heels in. He's advised to effectively sue for peace, to give up. He's not got much of an army left at all. King's Landing is in tatters around him. There are 3 massive armies heading his way. Corlys Velaryon says to him, you know what, you should probably just accept defeat at this point and just take the Black and go up to the wall. That's probably the best option for you. And he refuses, and he says, actually, I hereby order not only this, but Aegon, who he's now got, the other Aegon the Younger, who was Rhaenyra's son, the rival claimant, cut off his ear and send it out to these armies to show, as a threat to them. And with that, he gets into his litter, his transport, and he gets carried up into the Red Keep. But by the time he gets there, he's dead. He's been poisoned. We never find out who did it. But Aegon future Aegon III is there. Corlys Velaryon meets Cregan Stark at the gates of King's Landing. Now, Cregan Stark had agreed almost at the very beginning of this war to support the Blacks. He has gathered an army from the north. It's the winter in the north, so lots of men have come from all over the north who this happens every single time. They're actually doing a kind of self-sacrifice thing. They are taking themselves out of the north, so whatever food is left, warmth, is shared by fewer people, more people can survive. So this army is headed down south, and this has taken months. This has taken probably more than a year from beginning to end for this army. We know how long it takes to get all the way from Winterfell all the way down to King's Landing. This is a long, old trip. And they finally arrive there, and then Cregan Stark looks around and says, well, okay, what's the situation? We need to sort that out. I've come here with an army. Who am I fighting? What's going on? And he's told that there are technically still 3 houses in open rebellion. They are houses Baratheon, Hightower, and Lannister. And he says, great, I'll go and attack all those houses. I'll go off and I'll fight them until they surrender. And Corlys goes, well, okay, what I've done just before you came here, though, I sent off ravens to them in the king's name, saying, I hereby grant you forgiveness and amnesty if you now bend the knee. And so Cregan Stark, being a man of honor, realizes he cannot then undermine the king's promise of amnesty by immediately attacking. So he then has to sit and wait to see what the response is going to be to these letters out to these 3 houses. And that time period between him arriving and the responses back from those 3 great houses, are they going to bend the knee or not? That is what is known as the Hour of the Wolf. The undisputed power in King's Landing is Cregan Stark and this army from the north that have come down. Everyone else has been fighting all this time, battered, they're depleted, they're war weary, and he's got a bunch of warriors who are ready for a fight. He just completely bosses the situation. He takes over and he says, okay, well, that's that business done. What we're going to do now? Somebody's just assassinated the last king. Regicide. Who's responsible for it? Arrests 22 people, holds trials for all of these people. Most of them go up to the wall, take the black, head up to the wall. 2, he kills himself with ice, ceremonially chopping off their head with ice. Ice had been used to execute people in King's Landing before. Little shout forward there to A Song of Ice and Fire, and Ned Stark. So while he's doing this, he takes them. He becomes Hand of the King for a day, but this is only a week, and then the answers come back from those 3 houses saying, "Yep, we accept defeat. We'll bend the knee to the new king, Aegon III, and that's the end of the matter." So Cregan Stark is then there. Well, what now? So he goes back north. He gets married in the meantime to a Black Alison Blackwood, and a huge amount of his men marry Riverland women. But that's what he didn't want power. It becomes pretty clear he didn't go down south to gain power for himself. He went down south to honor a promise that he had made. And once that promise had been fulfilled, he went back up north again. So it's actually a hugely critical moment, but he uses his power and then just goes away. He gives it up. He could have claimed all kinds of things for himself, but he doesn't, because that's not what he's there. Although he comes across as incredibly gruff, incredibly happy to go to war, he also comes across as quite honorable. He had huge amounts of power, and he decided not to use it to grab power for himself. Couple of questions in the chat. James Barnum saying Tom Baker is the Doctor. Yes, and so are 12 other people, or more if you accept the expanded canon. Lyle Hammock saying no questions this week, just to thank you for your amazing content. Thank you, Lyle. I hugely appreciate it. You did, I think, send a question over on Patreon, so I will pick that one up in a moment. Angel Kernier, mispronounced that, I'm sure. Apologies. Saying first time popping in for a live chat. Welcome. If this is your first time for a live chat, then particular welcome to you. Please do get involved in the chat. The chat here are fantastic. Got some amazing moderators. Perfect excuse for me to say moderators. Thank you. You are fantastic. Anyway, saying your channel has helped me get through a very difficult time in my life. Keep doing what you do. Peace and love from Maryland, USA. Well, thank you. I love hearing it when people say this. If I can be a blessing, if I can help people through tough times just by doing this, then it makes me very, very happy. So thank you, and I'm glad that you've come through that time, and I hope that there's only good times in store for you in the future. 26 Art Girl. Just want to show my appreciation for what you do so professionally and with love. I have to acknowledge you. Well, thank you very much, 26 Art Girl. I do hugely appreciate that. Okay, question from Cranag Woman saying, hi, Robert. How do you read the relationship between Nettles and Prince Damon? So this is Damon Targaryen. As I say, we're going to keep on coming back to Damon Targaryen because he is at the heart of this story. He's a fascinating character. Nettles is one of the dragon seeds. Now, the partway through the Dance of the Dragons, the blacks realized that whereas the greens had the advantage of being in King's Landing and they had the advantage of going first, effectively, the blacks had the big advantage of the fact that they were on Dragonstone and they had a whole load of spare dragons, for want of a better word. There were lots of dragons just sort of hanging around on Dragonstone that didn't have riders. So if they could try and get some new dragon riders, this would bolster their forces hugely. They would be the big favorites to win the war. But they'd run out of pure blood. I hate that phrase, but you know what I mean. Targaryens. So what they did was they put out the call for any illegitimate bastard children of Targaryens, or those of Valyrian descent in some way, or frankly, anyone who wished to have a go at bonding with a dragon. Lots of people tried, lots of people failed, but 5 did succeed. And Ulf White, Hugh Hammer, 2 illegitimate sons from Corlys Velaryon, and also Nettles. Now, Nettles is probably the most interesting of the 5 because she, first of all, the description, the physical description we have of her is very clearly not Valyrian looking. She's got dark skin, dark hair, not the classic Valyrian look. And the way that she bonded with her dragon, who was called Sheepstealer, was to bring it sheep. That was as simple as it came. She noticed that this dragon liked eating sheep, so she brought a sheep for the dragon, and then next day another sheep, and each time she got a little bit closer, and eventually she built up this bond with the dragon Sheepstealer, which shows that she's clever to start with. She figured out how to do this. We do not know where the assumption is. George R. R. Martin has wavered a little bit on this, or been a bit vague on this, but the assumption is that she does have some Valyrian heritage somewhere. We do not know where. She was riding Sheepstealer, and then she became close to Daemon Targaryen, and the 2 of them were riding out together. Now, the Fire and Blood very strongly suggests, there's no first-hand evidence that we can see, but very strongly suggests that they were lovers. Daemon Targaryen seems to have had a string of lovers all over the place, and this absolutely kind of makes sense. So that seems to have been the deal. There is a smaller possibility. I have seen it argued. I don't know if I put huge amounts of weight to it, but if she is a dragon seed, if she has got some Targaryen ancestry, that does make her in some way related to Daemon Targaryen. So what if she's actually his daughter or something like that? What if she's actually a close relation to him? What we know is that when the order went out from Rhaenyra for Nettles, effectively for Nettles to be killed, to be brought back to King's Landing, Daemon did not comply with this. Rhaenyra was his wife, but he sided with Nettles over Rhaenyra, which implies a very strong bond. Lovers seems the most likely. The idea that there's the close familial connection is also possible, but I don't know. It was left vague, but that seems to have been the deal. And they do seem to have. She flew off towards the Vale while he was hanging around waiting for Aemond. He knew that this would only end with Aemond Targaryen was defeated, and he decided, I'm just going to end it now. We have to just have this fight. So it seems to be that he'd said to her, you go off there, I'll come and find you afterwards. But he died. At least we presume he died, as we saw. The body was never found. Classic way of saying, or maybe he didn't die. Question from John Pierce, saying, actually not a question, just saying Maryland, USA represent. I've never been, but I'm sure it's a wonderful place. Lady of Summer. There are many references to dragon saddles in Fire and Blood. Made me ponder over Tyrion's saddle design for Bran. All sets up for Daenerys' dragon saddle. Yes, absolutely. So this is one of the many call forwards that I think we're going to be having. Dany, we think, because we've watched Game of Thrones, the TV show, we think of Dany as being Dany the Dragon Rider. But in the books, this has only just happened. She clambers onto the back of Drogon and then flies around on him, and he heads off into the Dothraki Sea, and she doesn't know how to control him. And this is the big issue. He flies off, and she's like, how do I do this? And she's clinging on for dear life. Clearly, there's some practical stuff that she doesn't understand about. Now, she does think while she's there, oh, I'm sure I was told somewhere that the old Valyrians used to have magical horns that used to be able to control the dragons. That's one part of the equation, because don't you know it, heading towards Marine right now is a magical horn that can apparently control dragons. That's part of what we've got going on here. Another part is almost certainly Tyrion. Tyrion is fascinated by dragons. He has always been fascinated by dragons. When he was sort of heading down the River Royne on the Shy Maid, he was writing a book about dragons, of all of the knowledge that he got about dragons. He's designed a saddle for Bran, as we've already seen. Yes, I think almost certainly what we're going to have, a part of the Winds of Winter, is how Dany learns to control Drogon. Now, Tyrion will almost certainly be a crucial part of this, because also, do not forget those books that she was given way back. This is George R. R. Martin's plants these seeds very early. The books that Dany was given by Jorah, which are books about the Seven Kingdoms Targaryen history, we don't know actually what they were. And George R. R. Martin, who was asked this, and he very rarely gives away information, but he was asked about this, and he said, yeah, she's not really much of a reading type of person. But do you know who is? Tyrion. And he just kind of left it there. Tyrion is going to end up in Meereen. He will find these books. He will learn. He's fascinated by dragons, and he needs somehow to gain the confidence of Daenerys. It's not going to be like on the TV show, he sort of seemed to turn up there, and then eventually Dany just sort of trusted him. That's not going to be exactly how it is. He will have to earn her trust, because he is the brother of the woman who is currently effectively ruling the Seven Kingdoms, which is what Dany wants. She needs to be able to trust him. If he can show her how to control her dragon, how to have a saddle for the dragon, this will be hugely important. He will get information from those books that Jorah gave her ages ago. Anime lover Nicole saying, what do you think about the theory that Nettles is Leaf? Leaf, that I've not seen this theory. Leaf, the child of the forest. If I mean, I don't know. I've not seen the theory, so maybe there's some evidence I'm not aware of. They're described very, very differently, is my first thought, and so almost certainly not. And the other thing I would probably say is we do seem to know what happened to Nettles by rumor, by picking together bits of what happened. She headed off into the mountains of the moon. Then just after the war, there happened to be an army heading up into the powers that be needed to make sure that the Vale was under control. So they sent an army in there who happened to stumble across her and her dragon. And obviously quite a few of them died, but then she got on it, flew it off. That's the last that was seen of her. But there were rumors of a fire witch in the mountains of the moon. There's the burned hand. I can't remember the one of the clans of the Mountain of the Moon also seems to have very much a cult around fire and burning, and it just seems to suggest that she just set up camp deeper into the Mountains of the Moon, and her and Sheep Stealer just lived out their long lives there, and rumors and legends of her sort of carried on. Okay. Can you sum up the Vale situation at the time of the dance versus after? Who was Lady Arryn? What was the personal relationship to Rhaenyra? This is Brig 2630. So the Vale situation overall, they were, if you remember, and I have to admit, I will probably come back to this next week with more detailed information because the exact linkages across the House Arryn are quite complex, and I don't want to give you false information here. But before they were connected in with Rhaenyra, and that Rhaenyra trusted them. She sent one of her children off there with some dragon eggs because they had been married in to the Targaryens. This was Emma Arryn was actually married into the Targaryens earlier, so there was a familial tie in there. They were late into the battle. However, theirs was one of the three armies which came right at the very end. And as is often the case with the Arryns, is that we don't sort of talk about it, but they hold back a lot because they've got an incredibly good defensive situation. Why would they head out through the mountains to fight anyone else? The only people who can really challenge them are people who are riding dragons. But I will come back to that. I want to give a full answer on this one because there's a lot of good stuff in there. I will come back to this next week. Question from Catherine Furseth saying, "Hi Robert, hope all is well." It is, thank you very much. Now being in the age of the Dance of the Dragons, I hope you will indulge me by talking a bit about Mushroom. Very happy to talk a bit about Mushroom. What would you say is his narrative purpose? Is having a seemingly innocent and perceived powerless witness to events a part of it? Secondly, there are two dwarfs of importance in the history of Westeros, namely Mushroom and Tyrion. How do you see them mirroring each other, apart from both having escaped at one point to Essos in a wine crate? I think there's a couple of things I would want to say here. The first, yes, you have that there's this powerless witness, as I say, the person who is overlooked. George R. R. Martin likes this a lot. The cripples, bastards, and broken things, the people that get overlooked by others actually are the most important. Laris the Clubfoot is going to be one of these people as well. He is literally a cripple, so but he is immensely important and powerful throughout the Dance of the Dragons. But also, I would add that in terms of the narrative purpose, and this works on a couple of levels with Fire and Blood, because George R. R. Martin is writing who the characters of the writers of this are, as well as the actual events that are happening. Mushroom obviously has this clear role of challenging the kind of the fustiness of the Maesters accounts of what was happening. This is very important because without Mushroom's accounts, then this would be quite dry. This would be just the official history. What George R. R. Martin is, and the histories that we get, the other people that are there are Maesters or High Septon. Mushroom's the only dissenting voice, and this allows him to give us the flip side, which is important so it dramatically shows us the fact that this is not an objective account. This is not the truth of what happened. This is a person's version of what happened. We can't even, in a very meta way, be 100% certain that what the Gildane says, Mushroom says, is actually 100% true. Maybe he is exaggerating what Mushroom was saying. That's the kind of thing that Gildane would have done. So, pardon me. So this is his first kind of meta narrative. But the other thing with relation to Tyrion is, yes, there are sort of echoes between the characters and all the rest of it, but there's also an important in-world point here. This is the the foreshadowing of Tyrion, not just for us as readers, but in the minds of the nobles of the land. When they think of a dwarf, an imp, that's who they think of. Mushroom, who is well known for being salacious, for boasting about his sexual appetites, for telling crude jokes, having a puerile sense of humor. This is what people think about when they look at Tyrion. So the characters themselves impose that upon Tyrion, and he allows that to a degree, he plays up to it. But that is what the characters are thinking about. They don't think, oh, this is like Mushroom. But that is what the characterization is that the characters have of Tyrion. And that plays into their interrelations with him. As I say, it's very meta. The way that Fire and Blood works is deliberately meta on George R. R. Martin's part. Sebastian Holden, the death of the Queen's dragon Syrax during the dance is said to have been caused by a huge shadow with a blade. It is very similar to Renly's blade by Stannis, if true. Who could have casted it? Well, there are lots of options, but because so many people are being accused of being witches and mages, but I don't. My instinct is that this is not it isn't drawn. Attention's not drawn to this. So the boring answer was this was just a fight where the biggest, toughest dragon won, and then the queen died. So the queen's dragon died. So I don't think that this isn't a Melisandre thing, but it's possible that one of the many magic users who are there were involved. If anyone was doing that, this will be Damon, who had contacts out in that. So I don't think it's much. I would love to know anyone who's got any particular thoughts on this in the chat. It's not something I've looked at and come up with a massive theory, but it's because attention is not drawn to it in the tale. Maybe that's the Maesters hiding things from us. Creative Branches saying, I've got an Order of the Green Hand tinfoil theory for you. Order of the Green Hand, for those who do not know, they are another of the wonderful Song of Ice and Fire content creators here on YouTube. Please do go and check out their channel. They I've got a lot of time for them. They've been on this channel a couple of times in the past. They tend to often approach theories out of the orthodoxy of the groupthink of what a lot of Song of Ice and Fire theory comes from, which I think is good. That doesn't mean I always agree with them. In fact, a lot of the time I probably will disagree with them, but I hugely appreciate where they're coming from. Now, Mushroom was able to overhear important information throughout the Red. And by the way, if you happen to be watching this, hi guys, good to see you. Mushroom was able to overhear important information throughout the Red Keep and the inner circles of the court because he was consistently near everyone. People often disregarded his presence. Do you think it's possible that Mushroom was having an affair with Kristen Cole and that he subsequently fell in love with Kristen, and this is partially why he was close enough to the court to get detailed personal testimony? Okay, so this is a fascinating question there. I'll zoom out for one moment. The critical question here is, and this happens quite a bit, is we get the writing of Fire and Blood happening with Gildane saying, and such and such and such and such happened, and it's very clear that he's getting his information from Orwell, his predecessor, who wrote a book about it. But he doesn't always 100% trust Orwell because he wrote his book while he was imprisoned and trying desperately to make himself look like one of the good guys. So the he often then brings in other people and says, and their histories say such and such. And one of them is Mushroom. And Mushroom, for example, appears to have an account of what happened in the Green Council. And the Green Council was that group of people immediately after Viserys, who died, who came up with this idea of, you know what, we're going to put our guy on the throne. Mushroom was not there. We know Mushroom was not there. Mushroom was over on Dragonstone. Mushroom didn't have the faintest idea of what was happening at the time there. And yet he seems to be one of the people who have chronicled this in some way. So how could that be? I tend to the view, and this is the same with Septon Eustace, I think it is. I tend to the view that this is not a mystery. Mushroom was around, and Mushroom talked to people, and Mushroom listened to people, and Mushroom came to King's Landing when Rhaenyra came to King's Landing, and quite a few of the people who were in the Green Council were in King's Landing at that time. So he will have come into contact with a lot of people who were in that room, potentially. He clearly tries to find out information about stuff. So it doesn't strike me that there has to be a particular personal relationship between him and any given person in that room in order for that to be the case. So as for Kristen Cole, I personally haven't seen any evidence of it. I've not watched that video from Order of the Green Hand. Perhaps they've got some evidence that I missed. Do please go and check that out. But I've not personally spotted any evidence that there was a personal relationship of whatever salacious type Mushroom would have hinted at with Kristen Cole. Scott Walker, thank you very much for the super sticker. Zakalok saying, hi, Robert. Thank you for your videos. You're very welcome. To what extent did money play an important role during the Dance of the Dragons? A war is costly for both sides. How was gold managed by the two factions, and where did it lead to in the end? This is an excellent question, and this is one of the most underreported but important parts of the Dance of the Dragons. So the Green Council, they didn't get everything right. They had a head start. They could have done a huge amount of things if they wanted to. They didn't proactively do anything with the blacks. They just left them there. If they were absolutely serious about this, then they could have hired assassins or something like that. They didn't go down that route. But one thing they did do, which was very, very clever and important, was they realized that they had all the money. They had the crown treasury. And at this time, we have to understand the crown was quite rich. We'd had Jaehaerys I had a long reign, and it was a prosperous reign. And although there had been debt to the Iron Bank, that all got cancelled and forgiven in exchange for those 3 dragon eggs we talked about a little bit earlier. That was the deal that they came to. And then we also had Viserys's reign, relatively peaceful, relatively prosperous. The crown grew richer. So there was quite a big amount of cash. And in those days, that we are literally just talking cash. These are gold coins. This is what we have. And the Greens did a sensible thing. They said, okay, well, we're not going to keep this all here, just in case. We're going to split this money up. We're just going to go 4 different places. Quarter of it we'll send to the Iron Bank and Bravos. We'll just put it in a bank where people can't steal it. Quarter of it is going to go to Old Town, House Hightower. They're obviously at the center of all of this. Quarter of it's going to go to Casterly Rock, which is an incredibly hard place to capture. And the other quarter we'll keep here. This is our spending money pot. They will use this on bribes. We'll use this on hiring sellswords. We'll use this on the day-to-day expenses of warfare. What that meant was that when Rhaenyra, as happened halfway through the Dance of the Dragons, when Rhaenyra manages to capture King's Landing, what she finds is the coffers are empty. The money that she thought would be there was gone. Added to which, Corlys Velaryon, that Velaryon was the House Velaryon was the richest family at the time, um, outside of the royal family. He did have a huge amount of money, but then we get the Battle of the Gullet. The Lyseni fleet came in, hired by the Greens, came in, got involved in a battle. They kind of ran away, but they ran away via Driftmark, via Spicetown, and just raided it, the home of House Velaryon, and they took their riches and went away. So House Velaryon suddenly lost a lot of money. The Blacks had no cash, is the short answer to this. The Greens did have cash, they took it away. So when Rhaenyra was in King's Landing, she had a cash crisis straight away. She was trying to rule, but she didn't have the money to do it. The response from her was, on advice from others and also her own decision, was to raise taxes everywhere in King's Landing, to be charging people entry, to be charging extra money on everything you could possibly imagine. This did not go down well with the locals. They were suffering from a hard time. Obviously, huge amounts of they've got food supply problems going on. People are starting to starve there, and then the crown is coming in. This new queen has come in and is immediately taking their money away from them. This is not good. And this, over the 6 months that were there, this played a crucial part in turning the people against Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra was the realm's delight. She was loved across the nation, but 6 months of punitive tax rises within King's Landing and a whole range of other issues and a lengthy war and food crisis all meant that she was suddenly turned in. They were comparing her to Maegor the Cruel by the end of it, and there was uprisings. So money played a hugely important factor in this. If the Greens had left the money there, probably Rhaenyra would have won at that point. She claimed the Iron Throne. She had the money. She didn't need to raise the taxes. The people would have been okay, and they wouldn't have taken the dragon pit, and she would have then had lots of dragons and dragon riders, and she would almost certainly have won. So as far as the Greens were concerned, this was probably the best tactical move they made. Question from Ramon Cavalcante saying, greetings from Brazil. Oh, hi, Brazil. I found it very refreshing. The right style from a very different point of view than the main series in Fire and Blood. I was curious what you think of this change of point of view. Yeah, it is refreshing. It's different. It's the same feel as the world of Ice and Fire, which means that George R. R. Martin has had two different styles in writing about this world. He's got the first person point of view, which is what we have in the main series. Everything is from the perspective of whoever we're looking, whose eyes we're looking through at the time, whether this is through Cersei's eyes or Arya's eyes or Sansa's eyes, whoever it is, we're seeing what they're seeing. We're feeling what they're feeling. Dunk and Egg, it's the same. This is Dunk's story. So that's the first style. The second is this. It's also still subjective because it's written as if it's a proper history book, but we're being reminded again and again and again. We shouldn't take this as literal truth. We shouldn't take this as being absolutely what happened. So this is George R. R. Martin showing two different ways to tell us the same thing, which is that we cannot believe the entire truth. We do not know the entire truth of what is going on here. having the first person POVs works really well in helping us understand what's going on, but only from that particular perspective at that particular time. And even then, he is not telling us everything about that person. The classic example is Ned Stark. We have 15 chapters from Ned's perspective. He's thinking about Rhaegar or Lyanna or the Tower of Joy or Jon in most of those chapters in some way, shape, or form. And yet we don't get everything that he's thinking about. We just get the specifics of what he's thinking about. So even then, we don't get a complete data dump of what that person knows and is thinking about. So, taken as a whole, this is George R. R. Martin giving us his view of we cannot take this as absolute truth. But I do think there's another layer here. This is a really good question. Thank you. I think there's another layer here that I think the TV show were trying to put across. And I think, and it's quite a meta point, but I think this is what George R. R. Martin is trying to get across as well, or will do when we get there. At the end of Game of Thrones, the TV show, we had the book presented, the history of what had just happened being presented to Tyrion, and he kind of looks through it and he says, "Where I'm not here. I've not been recorded. I'm a central part of this, but why am I not here?" And it's like slightly awkward silence, but it's very clear that the history book does not actually tell the whole story. The only thing that actually tells the whole story is the lived experience, which is kept in the weirwood trees. And that is the difference between the two. That is because everything to them is at the same time, and it is people themselves going into it, offering themselves up to it, and the memories and the experiences themselves. That is the lived history, the lived experience, compared to the written history and the written experience. And I think George R. R. Martin is taking us towards a point of showing us the difference between those two things and letting us play around with this idea of what can we believe, what works best. So yeah, fascinating subject about writing. Question from Megasandra saying, have to ask, did the Maesters plot to destroy the Targaryen dynasty? Okay, good question. Question that comes up a few times around this. My take is that the Maesters were probably okay with the Targaryens ruling. What they didn't like was the dragons, because the dragons are the magical things. The dragons are the things which completely oppose what they stand for. So when the Maesters saw the opportunity at the end of the dance, that they finally had this chance to get rid of the dragons, I think then they took it. We get lots of hints in Fire and Blood that's the point at which the Maesters kind of switched gear. We get Munken, Grand Maester Munken, who is incredibly suspicious character when you read through the end of it. He basically, the Maesters have a power grab at the end of this. Aegon III, who's the king who emerges out at the end of all of this, is only 11, I think, when he takes the crown. So he has these 7 regents, people who are going to be ruling on his behalf, and obviously a small council, hand of the king, lots of people there. These 7, 6 of them die or are retired. Some of them are replaced. They also die. And this is just in the space of about 3 or 4 years. The person who survives is Munken, the Maester, and he ends up being the sole regent and Hand of the King, and only member of the Small Council. In other words, there was a period of, and we're not told the exact timings, but it seems to be about half a year maybe, when the Maesters ruled the Seven Kingdoms. The Maesters were in charge of everything. Not only were they acting, they could act with the king's authority as regent, also as Hand of the King. There was nobody in the small council to be opposing them. They also had control of all communications. They had control of everything. And we're told Munchen doesn't want to talk about what happened during that time. So very suspicious. The Maces are in charge. And at that point, suddenly the dragons, when they hatch, the dragons carry on hatching, but they're not growing into normal dragons anymore. They look poisoned. So the clear implication, I think, from Fire and Blood is that the Maesters saw the opportunity. They saw the chance to get rid of the dragons, and they went for it. So that, I think, was there. The question is broader. Is there a plot to destroy the Targaryen dynasty? Did they prompt the Dance of the Dragons in some way? There are coincidences there that we could go to. Obviously, the High Towers are involved, which seems quite strange. And the High Towers and the Maesters are very closely linked. Obviously, the Maesters are involved in the communications, and there are certain times when the Maesters seem to slightly overstep the mark in terms of impartiality in what information they pass on. So certainly they seem to have allowed the war to go in ways that they want. There is no evidence, or not enough evidence, I think, for us to be able to say the Maesters caused the dance. That there are too many elements to this that they just could not control. But I think they made best use of it once it was there. Not, as I said, to get rid of the Targaryens. I don't think they had a problem with the Targaryens as a whole. It was the fact that they were dragon riders, and the dragons were there, and that completely challenged everything the Maesters stood for. Question from Alejandro Martinez, saying, "Hi, Robert. Good evening. We don't know many of the masters and mistresses of Whisperers, but of the handful that are named, Lady Miseria included, 3 are Essozi. What do you think Westerosi kings would, or why do you think Westerosi kings would appoint people from Essos to a position on the small council, especially in the role of spymaster? Thank you for all your content. I just finished listening to all your Winds of Winter pre-release chapters on Patreon. Gracias." Well, you're welcome. Gives me the opportunity to seamlessly segue into thanking my patrons. Patrons, thank you. I cannot do what I do without your support. Thank you so much. It frees me up to have the time to create the videos, to do the research that I do. So thank you. If the benefits of being a patron, you get your questions as a priority on these live streams and various other things. One of the things I did a while ago now is I recorded all of the pre-released audio narrations for all of the pre-released chapters from the Winds of Winter. George R. Martin has produced quite a few of them, actually, over the years. So if you're interested in that or any of the other patron benefits, or if you just want to support the channel, for which I'm incredibly grateful, the best way to do it is by becoming a patron. There will be a link. If you're watching live, there will be a link in the chat, wherever that is. And if you are watching later, there will be a link down in the description. So thank you, patrons. I hugely appreciate it. Pardon me. In answer to your question about the masters and mistresses of Whisperers, 3 of, I think, only 6 or 7 that we know the names of are Essozi. Why might that be? Well, the other 2, for those who are wondering, was you get Tenor of the Tower, which was Maegor's Mistress of Whisperers, and obviously you also get Varys. 3 from Essos. Is there a reason for this? There doesn't appear to be any of the other positions that are often held by people from Essos. Well, that possibly, but I think each individual time has a slightly different reason. The first was because this was somebody Magor effectively brought in with him, and it's who he could personally trust, and he didn't trust many people. The second, Lady Miseria, this was from Damon Targaryen, who he would work with. So that's why she seems to get the job. And the third, Varys, was brought in by Aerys II, who had heard of him and his talents and brought him in. What links all of this is trust. The point, out of all of the members of the small council, the point of the master or mistress of whisperers is the person who gathers the information and therefore knows everything that's going on. They could be incredibly powerful. If you just imagine for one moment what a Lannister would do with being Master of Whisperers, or what another sort of house who's hungry for power might do if they had access to all of the kingdom's secrets, that would actually set them up as a potential challenger to the king. So it sort of makes sense to get somebody that you personally trust, who you also know has no claim to the throne at all, is completely outside of this. This is, I'm pretty sure, why Varys came, was Aerys hired Varys, because he wasn't going to let any, he was getting paranoid. He didn't want any of the other nobles in Westeros plotting against him. Varys from Essos, no one was ever going to support Varys for becoming king. He could trust him as much as he could trust anyone. So that seems to be the link of what is going through here. Break2630, what is your personal view of Laena and her daughters Rhaena and Baela as personalities? They are characters I wanted to know more of on after finishing Fire and Blood. Yeah, so we don't get much about them in Fire and Blood, it has to be said. So Laena, actually, what I will do, I'm going to see whether I can make the magic work another time. What I did last time was this. Here we go. Look at that. This is a fantastic family tree, Targaryen family tree. I can't remember off the top of my head who did it. I'm always keen to try and give credit to artists where it is due. So if you're watching this back later, there'll be a link down in the description to this. What you've got here is the Targaryen family tree of around this time, which is complex to say the least. But if you can see right in the middle, that is Rhaenyra, the rather grumpy-looking woman, sort of in the middle of this. The rather grumpy-looking man on the left there, that is Damon. So they, as you see, they had children across the who became Aegon III and also Viserys II. So that's where the sort of the bloodline goes. In terms of the question, Laena, Rhaena, and Baela. So we've got Laena being the first wife of Damon, and then the two daughters. We don't get huge amounts about it. The clear, because the story is told so much more from the perspective of the Targaryens and the Velaryons. We're seeing this through where Damon is, and Damon seems to see them as disposable. it's probably the wrong way of saying it, but they're just a stepping stone to where he wants to get to. So this is a place that I share your frustration because I want to know more, and I hope that the show will give us more. But it's George R. R. Martin, I think, deliberately taking the step back, as we've talked about here in Fire and Blood, and not giving us the whole story, just letting us try and figure it out for ourselves. So, and even not figuring it out for ourselves, getting to the point where uh, we're not told about certain things because that's not who the people who are in universe writing about this, what they're interested in. 26 Art Girl saying, my contractor is into Game of Thrones but has not read the books. I told him to read the first book at least. Then I brought up your channel for him to see. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Joken Hagar saying, I'm wearing my In Deep Geek shirt as I do every Thursday. Yes, fantastic. Always forget to talk about merch, but there's a link down there somewhere if you'd like it. Stuart Goodlad, thank you very much for the super sticker. The Andrew K saying, very curious to see which concepts House of the Dragon will expand on and or omit. The supplemental books give great Dance of the Dragons outline, but it's actually quite expansive. It is, but at the same time, I think we need to I don't know whether it's temper our expectations a little bit. When we had the first few seasons of Game of Thrones, you had book one largely adapted pretty faithfully, it has to be said, into season one. There were a few tweaks, but we had one whole book for 10 episodes. And that is not the situation that we have here with House of the Dragon. We have got, not in one block, a couple of 100 pages maybe about the Dance of the Dragons, the build-up and the aftermath, which is going to be over 5 seasons, 50 episodes. Yes, there's information there, but this is, compared to, say, even season 1 of Game of Thrones, we've got a lot less. So they have got a huge amount more room for expansion, and we should expect there to be characters that we only see bits of having much bigger roles. You will see some characters that are relatively minor that actually get bigged up a whole lot more on the TV show, and plot lines that were just hinted at in the books actually get developed, and we'll get in a whole load of scenes that were not in the Fire and Blood but have been included to expand and explain what we've been told, if that makes sense. So what at a pithy level, we've not got a book adaptation, we've got a book expansion. That is what we've got here. This is the source material, but then what we see is going to be a lot bigger than the source material. Reflective rambling. Oh, just picking up the question, what I was just talking about. Andrew K is curious to see which concepts House of the Dragon will expand on and or omit. The supplemental books give great, quite expansive. Your wishes and thoughts. So, in terms of the which concepts they will expand on and or omit, I think all the hints are, and in fact, what makes for good TV. So I'm okay with this, is the interpersonal relationships between different people. So things like Kristen Cole is, we talked about him a little bit earlier on, but Kristen Cole, his relationship with Rhaenyra and then his relationship with Alicent it's in the books, but it's only like a few lines here, a couple of pages really. That I think is going to be absolutely crucial in season 1. We're going to see he's going to be emerging as quite a big character, I suspect, and then his turning from being a massive supporter of Rhaenyra to being a massive opponent of Rhaenyra. We never get the impression that he completely buys into the Greens because of them, but it's because it's against Rhaenyra. So that as a interpersonal relationship, I'm pretty sure they will start beefing that up and showing it. Similarly, we don't get much in the Fire and Blood about the relationship between, say, Damon and Rhaenyra. There's lots of things implied, lots of things which we have to assume, but I think that they will build on this a huge amount more. He is clearly a hugely charismatic person. He has been, we put it charitably, mentoring her since she was a very young person. And then he he started off as her uncle, then he became her brother-in-law, and then he became her husband. And through all of this time, he seems to have been having lovers left, right, and center. How does that actually work? How is Rhaenyra the jealous type, or was she quite relaxed about it until the very end? That's the kind of thing that in order for these characters to work, we have to see how those key relationships actually work. So that's what I'm hoping for to get conceptually, is the characters and the interrelations between the characters played out a whole lot more. Question from Shah saying, "Hi Robert, could you give us a rundown of the surviving dragons? You did ask, could I do all of the dragons, but then gave me a get out. So I'm going to skip that because there's a lot of dragons, and I do want to get to bed at some point tonight. But a rundown of the surviving dragons and how you suspect they later died. Greetings and a good stream to you, Georg. So, Sheep Stealer, there were 4 dragons. Let's just be clear about this. There are 4 dragons that survived, or probably survived, the Dance of the Dragons, of which only one has a dragon rider. So that situation is massively different from where we before. Before we had 20 dragons and whole clutches of dragon eggs and lots of people to ride them, and now we're just down to 1. So we've got the 4 who are left. We've got Sheep Stealer that we talked about before with Nettles. I've said about where that seems to be that the history seems to peter out at that point. So the assumption is that Sheep Stealer just sort of probably died of old age. We get Silverwing, which is fascinating. This was ridden by Ulf White in the Dance of the Dragons, one of the dragon seeds. Previously, Alicent Targaryen, Jaehaerys's queen. And Silverwing was involved in the Second Battle of Tumbleton, and after Vermithor died, which was Jaehaerys's dragon, then Silverwing just seems to sort of moped around for a while and then flown off and ended up, we're told, in an island in Red Lake, which is in the Reach. And that's the last we hear of what happened to Silverwing. The third is Cannibal, that I've said Cannibal people did not approach Cannibal's cave because Cannibal was not a friendly dragon, but Cannibal seems to have stopped coming out of Cannibal's cave, and so the assumption is that Cannibal probably died of old age. And the fourth dragon we have is Morning. Now, Morning is interesting because Morning, that's Morning rather than Mour. So this is Morning as in daybreak. This was Rhaena Targaryen's dragon. Now, Rhaena, at the end of Fire and Blood, we see Rhaena riding Morning on the skies above King's Landing. We know that the dragon does not survive. We know that this is also not the last dragon. So somewhere between that moment and the last dragon, who happens relatively soon in the future, just a few years later, Morning dies. Pardon me. All of this we have not been told the details of anywhere. Not in Fire and Blood, not in the World of Ice and Fire. So what happens to Silverwing? I think we can be pretty sure about Cannibal, and we can be pretty sure about Sheep Stealer. Silverwing and Morning, we do not know. But Morning is the only, if we're taking this from a Maesters perspective, the only real threat to their idea of getting rid of the dragons, because this is the only dragon that can be ridden. Where we leave it in Fire and Blood, though, is that the new king, Aegon III, having got rid of his regents and taken over power himself, he does not like dragons at all. He's watched a dragon eating his mother. He has seen the Dance of the Dragons. He has seen what it caused. He does not like dragon. He seemed to have changed his mind a bit in his later years, wanting to try and hatch some dragons. Perhaps he's realized that the Targaryens do need dragons, but on a personal level, he does not like dragons. He did not want a dragon for himself. And he is known as Aegon Dragonbane, which seems to suggest that it's not just that he happened to be there while the dragons died out, but maybe he was the cause of some of these deaths. My best guess is probably Silverwing did just die of old age, but maybe Morning was used against some of these pretenders to the throne that we hear about. There are a few of them that were facing Aegon there. So don't know, but I think that basically that we have the situation of the Maesters wanting Morning to be dead, Morning to be still a relatively young dragon, and the king not really caring about dragons at all, which creates a situation where maybe Morning's shot down in trying to fight against one of the pretenders, like Alice Rivers, for example, says that she had Aemon Targaryen's child. She has a claim who has a claim to the throne, so maybe that's a place that she went into the battle. Reflective Rambling saying sleep is overrated, and there are those lamenting the full view of your lovely face, even if it's being nommed on by two dragons. Yeah, thank you. The lovely imagery. Okay, so the question from Mike McFly. This is a general dragon or Targaryen question. We've been told and know that dragons are magical creatures, and we also might be pretty sure that Valyrians are part dragon. So with dragon dreams, do you think that it is because of the magical dragon blood that they have these dreams and visions? And also, if that is the case, does that mean in turn that dragons might be able to have some kind of knowledge of future events? Obviously not exactly knowing the future. It's not like they could tell anyone when they saw them, but wondering whether Targs have magic dragon dreams that are filled with visions of the future. Okay, interesting point. So some Targaryens have what are colloquially known as dragon dreams, which are visions of the future. Dana the Dreamer is a classic example, foresaw the doom of Valyria. Do these dragon dreams come from the fact that the Valyrians have probably some draconic DNA spliced into them? I mean, it's possible. It might just be possible that the Valyrians are just a magical race and have that as part of who they are, in the same way that some of the children of the forest were greenseers. So I don't think that it's necessarily because of that. I do like the idea that dragons, and this is a great thought, that dragons might get dragon dreams. Dragons are intelligent. Dragons clearly know a whole lot more about what's going on all the way through Fire and Blood. Another fascinating, just little tweak is how through the bond between the dragon rider and the dragon, the the dragon rider knows when the dragon knows when the dragon rider dies, even if they're far away, that kind of thing. And so there is a clear bond there. Does the dragon see the future? I think if you were to speculate, and I don't, we have no information that we can categorically say on this, but if we were to speculate, why did Drogon go out, fly out to the Dothraki Sea? Maybe because it's quite a nice place, or maybe because Drogon knows that that's where Dany has to be. We can't say for sure. It's tinfoil theory, but it's possible. I like the idea, but we will frankly never know, I'm afraid. Oh yeah. So reflective family, you're saying I've still got the family tree up. Well, there you go. You've got my face on it being nommed by two dragons. Those are the lovely two dragons. Okay. Well, I might bring the family tree back a little bit later on. If there's, I think they've got another question, family tree related, in a moment. And Mike McFly, following on from that, says, was there anyone who had prophetic dreams of how the dance would ravage the Targ dynasty and family? There doesn't appear to, certainly within the Targaryens. We don't read of it. Again, it's possible someone did, but we don't read of it. Lady of Summer saying, hello, Robert, what's your take on Damon's body never being found? Also, unrelated, or is it, the significance of the battle taking place over the God's Eye with the death of two princes and the power of King's Blood? Well, I mean, I did talk about this a bit earlier. So I think it's of significance. It's above the God's Eye Lake. This is the heart of Westeros. This is the George R. R. Martin uses this again and again and again. The few square miles in that area, Harrenhal, the God's Eye Lake, the Isle of Faces, the Inn at the Crossroads, the Ruby Ford, they're all within just a few miles of each other. This is where the crucial turning points happen. Now, so that is one of the important points thematically. That is why they're, because these were the two, Aemond Targaryen, Damon Targaryen. These were the two big Targaryen battle leaders for the Greens and the Blacks. One of them had to come out on top. As it turned out, George R. R. Martin is thematically telling us all the Targaryens lose. This is not a matter of one winning and the other losing. This is a matter of everyone losing. So that's thematically what's happening there. At the point of crossroads, at the heart of Westeros, what is the Dance of the Dragons? Dragons and Targaryens dying and everyone losing. So that is thematically what is happening at that point. Whether there's a link across to the Children of the Forest, the Green Men on the Isle of Faces, maybe. We don't get it at all. There is one very, I don't think I've got a question on this, but it's worth mentioning if you've not come across it. Adam Velaryon, one of the dragon seeds, Corlys Velaryon's illegitimate son, is one of only two people anywhere in the history of the world of Ice and Fire as we know it to visit the Isle of Faces and leave again afterwards. The other being Howland Reed. Adam Velaryon flies in on his dragon, lands. We're told that he then spoke to the Children of the Forest, but then he sort of flies off again, reappears in a battle and dies. So we don't know what happened. We don't know for sure what did he meet anyone? What did he find? What did he see? This is not recorded. But it does create a link, a rare link between the Children of the Forest and the Targaryens and the dragons, and might this have been a thing which allowed the children of the forest in some way to um, influence events? They wouldn't want dragons around either. The Maesters aren't the only ones who wouldn't want dragons. What do tree loving people hate? Fire. This is not a thing that they would like. So, is there anything? Was the battle between, you talk about King's blood because they were both royal princes effectively, was that a King's blood sacrifice? I don't think it was a deliberate one. So there was no intentionality there. But yes, perhaps their blood would have washed up on the Isle of Faces. The roots of the weirwood trees would have drunk it up, and perhaps that will then have allowed them greater understanding, because this is, we don't hear about other dragons dying near weirwoods. This is the classic example of it. I mean, they die in dawn, or they die out in over the sea, or they in somewhere where we don't hear about there being a weirwood next to. This is the closest we get to a dragon dying next to a weirwood, a Targaryen dying next to a weirwood. So yeah, there is potentially a magical link here. I don't think it's about a sacrifice thing. I think this is about potentially the weirwoods soaking up the knowledge, the understanding, the sacrifice through that blood, which will probably allow them some understanding of Targaryens, which will have helped play into Howland Reed, who obviously was then trying to link in the Targaryens with the First Men, with Lyanna Stark. So that's where the link possibly comes through, is the two people who are visited have that link with the Targaryens. Question from Lyle Hammock saying, "Hello, Robert. Could you give a view on the Lannisters' role and motives in the dance? I believe one of them was Master of Coin, but I could be wrong. Also found the fact that finances were a big part of the dance interesting." Yes, so I talked about finances a little bit ago, but the person who was in charge of those finances for the Greens was Tyland Lannister. He was the Master of Coin. And he has, I mean, he doesn't do well out of this, because when the blacks arrive, then he gets tortured. Where's the money? Tell us where all the money's gone. And this is incidentally, as I was saying about Mushroom earlier, Mushroom was that Tyland Lannister was there, part of the group who came up with the plot originally, and Mushroom was there later on. But Tyland Lannister, he's quite a tragic figure. It's quite a sad story for him. But he's not the Lord of the Lannisters. He's the twin brother of Jason Lannister. Now he joined in with the Greens and led them to several ignominious defeats effectively, and died, leaving Joanna Lannister in charge of Casterly Rock. Now, what were the Lannisters trying to do? Well, I think what they always seem to be trying to do is just gain out of this politically, expand their power. The Lannisters were not as big at that time as they were later. During the Song of Ice and Fire, the Lannisters were the richest family in the Seven Kingdoms. Here, they're not, and we're told basically there are the Targaryens, the top of the tree. Then you get three big houses: Baratheons, Hightowers, and Velaryons. Everyone else is below that. So the Lannisters are wanting to push themselves up to the next rank. That's what their motivations are. What they find, however, and we've got a question in a moment about the Iron Islanders. What if they find, however, is that they try and push eastwards, but the Iron Islanders then just start raiding their coast. So they're not in a very good position. But it is interesting that we get Joanna Lannister, who's there at Casterly Rock. and then you get at the very end the three houses I told you that were sort of holding out, that potentially were still there supporting the Greens at the end of all of this: the Lannisters, the Hightowers, and the Baratheons. Each of those at the time was led by a woman. They were called the Three Widows, and this is an echo again of where we're going with A Song of Ice and Fire. Is that the male, very patriarchal start to this? When we actually have warfare, the men die very quickly, and we get more and more women finding themselves in positions of power. So we, through the Dance of the Dragons, most of the main houses, or at least half of the main houses, at some point are being led by women. So this is this is a George R. R. Martin theme all the way through Fire and Blood. It's that you may think of this as being still this very patriarchal top-down culture, but that's because that's the history that we've been told. In reality, a lot of the most important characters were female. Question from Lornock20 saying, "Hi Robert, did the Iron Islands play any significant role in the dance? Also, do you know of any of the Northmen who stayed behind when Cregan left for Winterfell, made a name for themselves down south? I can't remember hearing of any Northmen in King's Landing after the dance." Okay, so two bits here. The first is the Iron Islanders. And this is where we get introduced to Dalton Greyjoy, the Red Kraken, who both sides reach out to him because the Iron Islanders obviously have got a very important fleet, and the Velaryons do as well. They spend a large part of the first part of the war effectively blockading King's Landing because that's what they can do. They're trying to prevent provisions from coming into King's Landing, trying to starve the Greens out effectively. The Greens tried to get the Greyjoys, the Iron Islanders, on their side, and they said, "Well, you could be master of ships, Dalton Greyjoy. You can come here, and we'll give you rewards. And if you could just go and deal with Corlys Velaryon for us, that would be fantastic." And Dalton Greyjoy understandably went, "Okay, let's see what the other side are offering." The Blacks said, "We're not asking for anything from you. All we would like is for you to just raid the west coast of Westeros for a while. If you don't mind, that would be great." Greyjoys love raiding the west coast of Westeros, so they did. They worked their way all the way up the Reach, the Westerland. Lannisport was sacked. They just went through and destroyed huge amounts of the west coast there, and this wrecked a huge amount of what the Green, because this was the main part of the Greens' power base, the Lannisters, the Hightowers. So that was what their role was, and that it wasn't completely influential in that it didn't change the outcome of the war, but it did mean that the Greens' army was a lot slower to mobilize and a lot more. They were a lot more politically distracted, and they were a lot weaker when they did try and sort of engage in battles. So that was what happened with the Ironborn, the Red Kraken. Incidentally, he got killed by one of his salt wives shortly afterwards. So he was about to carry on raiding, but then died himself. The army that came from the north. We were talking about Cregan Stark a while ago. Right at the end, so Cregan Stark comes down with this big army from the north. They can't really go back up north because this is the whole point, is winter has come and there's not room for them in the north. So what are they going to do? Cregan Stark himself is going to go north. Some people go north with him, but the bulk of the army, what is left for them? Well, huge amounts of men have died across Westeros, and so what happens is they decide to marry up. It was arranged for them to marry to the widows of the men who died in the Riverlands, and they had what are called widows' fairs, and they tried to set up the widows of people, you know, who died in the war, with some Northerners who'd come down and weren't going to head back up north. So that's where a lot of them, they just literally settled down into whatever lives they found there, farmers or whatever. And some of them set up, some of them became bandits in the Riverlands, and some of them headed off to Essos and set up free companies over there. So sellsword companies. So they went to a lot of different places. We don't hear of any specifics, you're right, of any of these people. They don't seem to have stuck around in King's Landing. King's Landing actually wasn't a great place to be at that particular moment in time. So that's quite understandable. But yeah, in the Riverlands, what you'll find actually is that there's quite a lot of northern inheritance there now, which helped bolster those in the Riverlands who were still worshipping the old gods, like House Blackwood, for example. Question from Isaac McCardle saying, "Hi Robert, hope all is well. Thank you. The more I've been watching yours and other content creators of Song of Ice and Fire content, the more I feel like the Dance of the Dragons is in essence a huge set piece for what's coming in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, albeit slightly more condensed. What specific parallels do you think we're going to see?" Thanks. A lot. I've talked about a lot as we've been going through this, so I'll just try and add on a few extra things. A sort of a meta level, George R. R. Martin is wanting to show us the damage that dragons can do. This is, I think, if you get the beginning bit of A Song of Ice and Fire, you know that dragons are big and powerful, but we haven't actually seen them in action. Here in Fire and Blood, in the Dance of the Dragons, we see them in action, and thousands, tens of thousands of people die. So that's one thing he's showing us. He's also showing us very clearly a Targaryen succession crisis. This happens all the time with the Targaryens. It's not just every now and then there might be a bit of debate about who the rightful heir is. This happens all the time, and it often plays out in bloodshed, and it also often plays out in the woman being overlooked in favor of the man. So that's another thing that's going on, and the link across to dragons, I think, is going to play out as well. In the dragon seeds, he expanded a lot on this in Fire and Blood. Clearly this idea that you have to have this bond between the dragon rider and the dragon, and if you do not have Valyrian blood, that's a lot harder. So if you've got a situation, as we're likely to have in Winds of Winter, or probably actually in A Dream of Spring, where you get Daenerys and dragons coming up against Phaegon, who is probably not Aegon, who he claims to be, but probably does have some Targaryen blood in him a few generations ago. What will happen when he meets a dragon? I think George R. R. Martin is wanting us to be pondering this. He's given us one thing already with Quentin. Much was made with Quentin Martell of the fact that he was saying, I've got some Valyrian heritage a few generations ago. Is that foreshadowing for what's going to happen with Phaegon? I think quite possibly. And in a much bigger way, the dragon seeds are also playing into this. But I think there's two specific things, specific scenes that I think are foreshadowy. One I'm pretty sure on, one I want to happen and I think is being foreshadowed. The one I'm pretty sure on is the scene that we have when Rhaenyra reigns over King's Landing. We talked about it already. They had no money. The people have not got much food. There's been a war going on for a very long time. then we start getting riots in the city. People are turning against her, and eventually she has to flee. This, I think, is going to get echoed in Cersei in King's Landing in the Winds of Winter. Cersei, we've been getting in the Dance with Dragons, we're getting lots of these kind of echoes. There's no money. They don't have any money. They're hugely in debt. There's effectively a blockade on King's Landing. There are people being disgruntled. We know that there's already been a riot in King's Landing as well. I think that what we're going to see, particularly with Fagon heading towards the city, offering a realistic opportunity, and probably with Cersei destroying a part of the city. This time, the Great Sept, before we had the Dragon Pit being destroyed. I think the echoes there are very strong, that the people will turn against her and she will have to flee. So I think that's one thing where we've got very clear echoes happening. One thing which I would like to see, and I think we've got some foreshadowing for, but I don't think we can be certain yet, is the battle on dragons above the God's Eye Lake. The dragons that Dany has, all three dragons, I don't think she's going to keep all three dragons. On the TV show, obviously, the Night King took one of her dragons. I don't think the Night King obviously was a TV show character. He's not a character from the books. But it does ring true that somebody is going to take control of a dragon. This is clearly part of Euron's plan. What if Euron gets a dragon? He then becomes a dragon rider. Imagine this is exactly if George R. R. Martin keeps ramping up the crazy god complex character of Euron. The next step, him riding a dragon. How much carnage can he create? The echo there is he's got an eye patch. He's got one eye. Aemond, one eye, was one of the people who was in that battle. I wonder whether we're going to see the equivalent of a battle between Euron and somebody else on a dragon, maybe Jon, say, on a dragon. And they fight. And this is why the callback to the questions we had a bit ago about the body, the Damon Targaryen's body, that it was never found. Maybe this is why, because George R. R. Martin is saying one person does survive here, and this is going to be Jon, who's taking on the Damon Targaryen role. So that's something I hope. I think the echoes are there. I think this makes sense, but we can't be sure yet. So yeah, there's a lot of things, echoes, that George R. R. Martin is setting up. Mara Lee saying, how did the Dance of the Dragons affect the future of the Targaryen line of succession? Okay, so this was why I was keeping up the family tree. So I'll make it even bigger. Here is the line of succession. So if you can look in the middle, as I say, we've got Rhaenyra there right in the middle, and Damon just there, who she's married to. So you will find that what happened, Aegon the Third is their son, and so this is where the line of succession goes to, because in the top right hand corner of that you will see that is the line. In fact, the person in the top right hand corner there, that's Alicent, pardon me, Alicent Hightower, and you can see that her line with Viserys the First, it peters out, it dies out. So that is not, the Greens ultimately lose, in as much as their line is not the line of Targaryens going forward after this. The line of Targaryens going forward after this, actually, it's not through Aegon the Third. This is then through Viserys the Second, and then his son Aegon the Fourth, and so on down through there. So that's what happened with the family tree. The other thing to note, I think, I mentioned this a little bit before, but we have the point of principle established again. People took it that this is what happens when you have a woman ruling. Rhaenyra is you have riots, you have starvation, you have high taxes, you have bad things. And this is again, George R. R. Martin takes this and says, this is not misremembering history because those things did happen, but interpreting it in the way that you wish to interpret it for your own personal needs. So you will see that what happened then is again and again, two, three times the an older uh, female in the line of succession gets passed over in favor of a younger male, using the Dance of the Dragons as an excuse, saying this is what happens when you have a woman on the throne. So when Dany is trying to claim the throne, she is trying to become the first official Targaryen queen ruling, which makes the is she actually going to sit on the Iron Throne thing take on an extra level of significance, because is she actually going to get there, or is she only ever going to just about reach it? Is she, when she gets there, going to be, if she does reach it, is she going to be a good queen? This adds an extra layer to this history, because George R. R. Martin has shown us how time after time after time the female rulers and potential female rulers are just ruled out, pun intended. Question. Got a few questions about House of the Dragon specifically, the TV show now. From my patrons, Marva Solomon's saying, how do you think they will fit in the background in House of the Dragon, like Aegon and Maegor and Jaehaerys and Alicent? There's a lot of important and interesting setting before the Dance of the Dragons that probably is important to the storyline. So some of this, I think they have to draw a line somewhere. They have to start the story somewhere. We may get flashbacks, we may get mentions, but Aegon and the Conquest, Maegor the Cruel, that part, I don't think we're going to see. That's not the focus of this series. We will see something with Jaehaerys and the fact that in order for us to understand how Rhaenys fits into this situation, we have to understand that she got passed over for the throne back in the day, and then this is potentially again happening with Rhaenyra. So we will probably start up with a little bit of that background. I don't know how they're going to do it yet, whether it's going to be flashbacks or some other mechanism for doing it. But we will get a little bit of that background about the Great Council and how Rhaenys fits into this whole picture. As for the scope of season one, I think we will get the first, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 episodes maybe before anything with hostilities. I think that if Viserys is still effectively still king, right up until the very nearly the end of the first season, it would not surprise me in the slightest. We're going to have a lot of they will have to do a lot of explaining of the background and history, and one of the main points they will do is that people being passed over the throne when they probably rightfully should have had it. Lady Pushkins. Hi, Robert. When we finally get to watch House of the Dragon, which side do you think most people will be rooting for? Green or black? I feel this is likely inevitable. What do you think? Yeah, I think it is inevitable. I think that with Game of Thrones, we saw people were rooting for specific individuals and houses. I mean, I'll put my case again that this clearly is against what George R. R. Martin's writing about. I think he's wanting us to see that the struggle for the Iron Throne, the wars, it just causes dissension and pain and destruction. Actually, picking sides is part of the problem, but it's inevitable. We have two sides. We have a civil war. People will come to conclusions about who is in the right and who is the rightful monarch of the Seven Kingdoms. And the indications we've got so far are that they will be putting the blacks in quite a sympathetic light. Not necessarily always doing good things, not necessarily being good people, but their claim is the best one. And I think that is fair to the text. I think that that kind of reflects what we read in Fire and Blood, in the world of Ice and Fire. But the promotional blurb that we've had from them so far talks about Rhaenys being passed over for the throne simply because she was a woman, and then talking about in similar language for Rhaenyra. So I think that's the prism through which they are presenting this to us. And also, I think it was noticeable, we've had a teaser trailer. That's not the whole story. It reflects just part of what they have filmed so far. But it's noticeable that the character we heard speaking, therefore we're immediately emoting with on some level, is Daemon Targaryen from the Blacks. And we see a whole lot more of their side of things, the Velaryons, with Rhaenyra. We saw, I mean, we didn't even see all of Otto Hightower once. We saw just like a clip of his Hand of the King badge. We saw Alicent Hightower once. Most of this was focused in on the Blacks. So my guess is that this is where our sympathies are going to be drawn towards. And as I say, I think that's probably fair. I think with the source material. John Pierce saying, I wonder what Aurane Waters will do with his fleet. He was with Stannis. So this is moving right up to A Song of Ice and Fire. He was with Stannis, but if he hears of another Targaryen, will he join Aegon based on former Targaryen alliances? What are your thoughts? Okay, so he was. This is Velaryon bastard, who Cersei has as her master of ships, and he disappears with the ships, basically in Dance with Dragons. And there are rumors maybe he set himself up as a Lord of the Stepstones. I think he has to have gone somewhere with these boats. The Stepstones seems a logical place. What I think we're looking at is a couple of options. Either he has gone to join up with Fagon, which is possible. Having someone with Valyrian blood supporting him would work very well. Or if he has gone to the Stepstones, then a little bit later in this story, that's where Dany's fleet is going to have to go through. In order to get to Dragonstone King's Landing, she will have to take her fleet through the Stepstones. And if Aurane Waters then sees this what will be a massive fleet, with Unsullied, with sellsword companies, with dragons flying overhead, almost certainly with the Iron Fleet, which has been captured, then he may well turn and follow her. So that, I think, yeah, he's no longer on Team Cersei anymore. Just Sing. Hi, Robert. Hope you're well. My question is more related to House of the Dragon. How do you think they'll tackle the issue of multiple narrators, especially when their interpretations of the same event completely differ? Yes. So this is something I mean, I've been asked this a few times, and we don't know the answer to this yet, because Fire and Blood does, as we've said, we've got Gildane who's writing it, but then there are some times when because he wasn't in the room, he's relying on other people's accounts. And there are some times when he says, yes, so and so says this, but then such and such other person says that, and what this other person thinks maybe that. And then Gildane sort of opines on what he thinks is the most likely. So this is classic George R. R. Martin leaving things slightly vague and open to our interpretation. How are they going to handle that on a TV show where you can't just say, here's one version of events, here's another version of it? Well, some of the time, I think you can, with clever and strong writing, you can allow for there to be moments left open for the audience's own interpretation. By which I mean, classic example, what did Bill Murray whisper into Scarlett Johansson's ear at the end of Lost in Translation? That's left private to the characters, and it's left for us as the audience to decide, to read into it. That is, if you're a skilled enough filmmaker, director, you can do that to leave the audience not feeling tricked, not feeling as if they've missed out, but actually respecting the distance there and respecting the mystery. So that's how they can do this sometimes. I think the default will probably be to go with what Gildane said. They will probably, I think they know that the fans love Mushroom and Mushroom's accounts. I'm sure they will, at the very least, give a few nods to his salacious speculations, let's put it that way. So I think that they will, maybe they will have characters gossiping about various things. Maybe they will allow for there to be gaps. That what happened between Kristen Cole and Rhaenyra is a classic example. We get different bits of speculation from different people. What are they going to do on the show? Well, they might just leave a final scene behind closed doors and leave it at a place where we don't have to know. We don't need to know. It'll be frustrating if we don't, but that's a mystery there. This is a thing that happens more than you think in a lot of TV shows. I can remember I watched season 1 of The Crown a while ago, and I can remember thinking the amount of times they did that, where there was something that is lost to history, what two people said to each other. The camera would just sort of pan away, and we'd just sort of leave them having a discussion, and we see what happened afterwards. So this is a recognized technique. So it would not surprise me if they do that quite a lot. Question from Gabriel Farrell saying, having just finished my first audiobook go-through of A Song of Ice and Fire, it was awesome to be able to come on here and listen to the pre-release chapters of The Winds of Winter and continue the experience. That's over on Patreon. Anyway, my question for you is this. Top 3 moments you are most looking forward to see on screen in House of the Dragon. So, yeah, top 3 moments. I'm not sure I can pick top 3. I was thinking about this beforehand. I come up with 4 that I'm really keen to see. The Green Council, when they're all gathered together in a room plotting. This is going to be great. This is going to be fantastic. So many different characters, just the decision being made to, shall we do this? Shall we make our guy king? That will make for great TV. I would love that. Blood and Cheese is horrific. It really is. The more you think about it, it's going to be horrible. It will, for people who haven't read Fire and Blood, who don't know, aren't expecting it, it will probably have the same kind of impact as the Red Wedding. It turns, a bad thing's about to happen, but then suddenly it's even worse than you thought it was going to be. So that, I think, is something I'm really looking forward to. Aemond and Damon fighting Battle Above the God's Eye. Talked about it a few times on this stream. That is going to be epic. I'm really looking forward to that. And the other thing, I don't think they will show in detail, but Adam Valarion on the Isle of Faces, how amazing would that be? Um, we never even really saw the Isle of Faces on the TV show, like main Game of Thrones. So the idea that maybe we get a look at it, that would be quite splendid. Reflective Rambling saying Mushroom as secret narrator to be revealed at after being in the background. I want this so bad. I won't shush until proven wrong. That would actually be quite splendid to have him as a sort of a secret narrator for it. Yeah, that would be great. Creative. I think this is my last question from uh, patrons. So now is a good time to drop any further questions over in the chat. I'll try to pick up as many of them as I can. Creative Branch is saying it's going to be a challenge to differentiate the dragons in House of the Dragon. They'll have to give them a bit more personality than Daenerys' dragons. What dragon's personality are you most excited to see in House of the Dragon? Well, I'll answer the specific question before going to a slightly bigger point that I think is going to be quite important in how House of the Dragon works. I'm fascinated to see. I'd love to see Cannibal. I would, but Vhagar is the dragon I'm most interested in. Vhagar is one of the original 3 dragons that invaded Westeros. This is Queen Visenya's dragon. So this is a dragon that has lived a long time, has experienced a lot, is very ferocious. So I would love to see that. But I also, if they do this, I would love it when we get Silverwing and Vermithor, who they were the dragons for Jaehaerys and Alicent, and there are hints in the in Fire and Blood that the 2 of them, because of the bond between their dragon riders, there's a bond between the 2 dragons, and I would love to see that played out. So those are the dragons, specific dragons I'm thinking about most. But the bigger point, I think, is that yes, we say this a lot, but it is undeniably true. There are a lot of different dragons, and there are a lot of different Targaryens with very similar sounding names in Fire and Blood, and there will be in House of the Dragon. This is something the showrunners will be very aware of. What they do not want is to immediately put people off by introducing they've already got an incredibly complicated background with lots of people marrying and remarrying, and what relation is everyone to everyone else, and they've got characters with Rhaenys and Rhaenyra, and they've got all the different Aemon and Aemons, and Aegon, and 2 different Aegons, and they've got a lot of characters that have got very similar names. So this is something they will be very aware of, and so expect them to ease us into it. The dragons, we're not going to see 20 dragons in episode 1 in all of their glory. We will start to be introduced to a few dragons at a time. The later dragons we'll probably only see later on in the series. So pardon me. So this is the way that with the dragons, expect to meet the important dragons like Vhagar early on, but the ones that only really get in on the action later, like Cheap Stealer or like Cannibal, they're not going to really appear in season 1. They're not going to create them. What, in terms of the people and the characters, expect to have quite a lot of explaining of who the different people are, and also probably keeping the cast of people in the 2 camps relatively small to start with. So we're not going to be introduced to all of Alicent's children. we will see them all and they will be there, but then they're not all going to be individual important characters right from the off. Similarly with Rhaenyra's children, that don't expect them all to just sort of line up and just we have to remember each of them. They will be trying to ease people into this. They will focus in on who the key main characters are and then build up and out from that. Caius Ballerina. Oh, actually, let's quickly just pick up from Mike Hall saying, "How long do dragons live? Do they ever die if they aren't killed?" Yes, as far as we can tell. The thing is that we don't have, I think I talked about this last time, we don't have many examples of a dragon leading a full life, because the majority of the dragons that we see die in battle. So it's only really Balerion the Black Dread, who lived to several hundred years, that we see go through the entire life cycle. How long? We don't know how long they potentially can live, but they just keep on getting bigger and keep on getting older and a bit sleepier towards the end. Caius Ballerina, thank you very much for picking up a question for Luke Morano. Do you think Cannibal could have come from Valyria with Balerion? And if so, do you think he could have gone back like Balerion did? Okay, so Cannibal is a deliberately unclear age. There's even a hint in either Fire and Blood or the World of Ice and Fire, I can't remember which, that maybe he was even there before the Targaryens arrived. Maybe that's how old Cannibal actually is. So did he come across with Balerion at the time? Well, we're told that there were 5 dragons that came across with the Targaryens, of which 4 died and then 2 were hatched. And so Balerion is the only one that survived from that original group. That seems to rule out the idea that Cannibal came across with them. Cannibal has never had a rider, as far as we can tell. So where did Cannibal come from? The best guess is that Cannibal was hatched on Dragonstone and just went feral very early on. There wasn't a dragon rider there. Let's not forget there weren't very many Targaryens for quite a long time on Dragonstone. So that's almost certainly what happened. Could Cannibal have gone back to Valyria? Possibly. We don't see any reports of this. And normally you'd expect dragon reports because they're quite big and impressive and easy to see. So it's possible, but doesn't seem likely. The most likely solution is Cannibal just dying. Reflective rambling. I'm picking up the question from Mike Hall. I've done that a couple of times this time. Reflective rambling. Thank you very much for doing the picking up on the question. I picked up on that one myself a moment ago. Lady Pushkin saying, "Do you think dragons can sleep or hibernate and be awoken?" I don't think we've seen that happen, but I don't see why they couldn't. Caius Ballerina picking up a question for C. McBroom, saying, "It seems to me that the anarchy would parallel the dance closely. Thoughts on this? Also, do you like the theory that Alicent's mother was Sarah Targaryen?" So when you say the anarchy would parallel the dance closely, if you're talking about in the current story of Song of Ice and Fire, I assume that's what you mean, then yes, there is a lot across the piece. The fact that there's been a lot of warfare, particularly in the Riverlands, and then also we get dragons potentially fighting there. There is a lot of parallel there. Do I like the theory that Alicent's mother was Sarah Targaryen? I mean, I don't know if I've seen any evidence to suggest that she might be, but I actually quite like the idea that this is just the Hightowers. They're not trying to make a claim for this on the basis of they've got other Targaryen blood in there, which probably they would if they did. It's just that it's a punt for power. They're just trying their hand. That works for me. I think if she was, then I think we would have heard something about it somewhere along the way, because this would be an extra um, part of the claim for the children that actually these are Targaryen on both sides. So I don't think so, personally. Um, Matt Savino saying, "What is the god that Rhaego Draz worships? It's mentioned once in Fire and Blood, once in the main book series." Um, well, you've got me. Things that are mentioned once, I can't always remember. I will answer this one next week. I will happily pick this one up and look into it. Reflective Rambling saying, the real question is, would Dan the dog side with the Greens or the Blacks? And why is Black Alley deserving of an expanded storyline in House of the Dragon? Yeah, I hope Black Alley is. Dan the dog, who would Dan the dog support? I think Dan the dog would support whoever would allow him to run around lots and chase in vain after squirrels, which seems to be what his favorite hobby is. Never catches them. But he enjoys chasing after them. Okay, let's pick up on a few more questions in the chat. Nick Naylor saying, will Valyria get some more stories, or will it remain semi-mythical like Numenor? I assume you're talking about TV shows. There was a rumor that we were going to get a TV show based in Numenor, based in sort of the politics on Numenor, based in Valyria, based on the sort of politics there. That hasn't come to anything as far as I can tell. There are plenty of stories out there. I think that one just probably didn't work out. C. McBroom saying, sorry, Marissa meant the anarchy as in a brother usurping a sister, and the breakdown of society afterwards equals the Dance of the Dragons. Yes, okay, I get that, absolutely. Agree. Andrew Kay saying, hopefully the showrunners will capture the horror of war, grey blur of tragedy and atrocities on both sides, true to the reading experience. Yes, I hope so. It's the one of the things which comes out even stronger, I think, in Fire and Blood than in a lot of A Song of Ice and Fire is this idea of just horror in the Riverlands. It's just each time there's a new battle, it just seems to get worse. In the end, you get what's called the Butcher's Ball. You get this war. This is where Kristen Cole met his end. He was marching back through the Riverlands, and as he and his army were going through, then he was going through this land where people had set up dead bodies in these kind of caricatures of feasts and just really grim, grisly stuff. And it happened all the time, for day after day, as they're marching through. Somebody had been setting up all these dead bodies, mocking them as they went through. And then eventually they started just ignoring the bodies, because this happened all the time. And then they got to a point where they were pretending to be dead bodies, and they jumped up and they ambushed them. And it's just grim. It's horrific. There's the fish food, Battle of the Fish Food, because so many people died, got called the fish food. So yeah, it's horrible. Terra Incognita saying, theoretically, there could be a very old dragon that's just been sleeping in a cave for a long time. Well, theoretically, we don't know. So the sleeping dragon thing, we've not been told about it, but so possibly. Quick look. Andrew Kay saying, I remember, as much as I darkly enjoyed it, the level of horror when reading the dance, I just wanted it to end at some point, became exhausting. Yeah, exactly. And that was the feel that I hope comes out through the TV show towards the end. It's just the entire continent is just on its knees at the end of all of this, and you get King's Landing is just broken down, and all society is broken down. They've got 3 people claiming to be king. Um, they've got armies coming to attack again, and everyone just wants an end to this by it. And they actually do not seem to care who the king is. It's just, we just need somebody. We need somebody we can rally around, just so we can move on. Just pick a person. Aegon the Second, that's not working. Let's try Aegon the Third. This is that's the feel of it. It's just, we just need it. We need it done. So it's it's grim reading. Pardon me. Okay, I think with that, I will start drawing this one to a close. There's some fantastic questions here today. House of the Dragon is, as I said at the top of this live stream, it is still filming. I think they've probably got a few more weeks of filming, and it's on track for 2022. They seem very confident about this, and why shouldn't they be? Next week, I'm going to be back with the next of these histories. I'm going to be looking at the Blackfire rebellions, which is this whole series of rebellions. There are 5 of them at the end of the day, I think, and so we'll work our way through that. This was after there are no dragons, but the Targaryens are still very much in control. Just picked up, there was another question, reflective rambling, picking up from Matthew Bacon, saying, just want to say I love the Feanor video the other day, and if I had a question, it would be to ask which character study is coming next. Oh, well, I'm really glad you do. So this is Lord of the Rings. If you don't know, I also cover Lord of the Rings. Feanor is a character that, if you're just someone who's watched the films, the movies, you may not have come across, but he is hugely important in the history of Middle-earth. And I've started doing a series of studies of these foundational characters in the history of Middle-earth, legends of Middle-earth, I'm calling it. So I did one on Glorfindel. I've just done one on Feanor. The next one coming up, I've got one on, did Gandalf really die? What happened there? That's coming up next. But the next one in that series about legends of Middle-earth, I think I'm going to do Celebrimbor, who was the forger of the Rings of Power. And again, a really important person. Somebody, if you played the Middle-earth games, video games, then you'll be aware of him, although that is not canon. But he's, again, a really important character in the history of Middle-earth. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm enjoying making those videos. Okay, so next time we're going to be looking at the Blackfire Rebellion. If you're watching this back a little bit later, then you will find a link appearing somewhere here to some more of these live streams. There will be a link appearing somewhere here if you are interested in supporting this channel, joining Patreon. Okay, that's all for this time. Take care, everyone. I shall see you again same time next week. Bye now.